Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland's live coverage of Day 2 of the SNP Conference. It's a Saturday the 31st of August. My name is Brian Liddy and I'm here in Cowcaddens and we have Douglas Mackenzie who's going to be coming to you live from conference in Edinburgh. So SNP Conference kicked off yesterday, and over the weekend members will debate policy, they'll elect members to new positions, they'll hear from senior party figures, and they'll reflect on the change that the SNP has delivered for Scotland since 2007. The SNP are expected to use this conference to convey the message that Scots enjoy happier and healthier lives due to SNP policies that have been delivered, from the baby box to the Scottish Child Payment to free personal care for the elderly. Their message will be that Scotland is leading the way in many areas. This conference marks the start of the conference season, and of course this is in the run-up to the 2026 Holyrood election. So for that reason, you could say that the 2026 election campaign starts here, with the SNP being the first party to kick off their conference season from Edinburgh. We'll be hearing from members and activists on shaping party policy. We'll also hear from some of the SNP's leading figures today. Party Deputy Leader Keith Brown spoke yesterday and was followed by Deputy First Minister Kate Forbes, who gave a speech and led a discussion with Cabinet Secretary for Transport Fiona Hislop and Gillian Martin, who's standing in for Mary McCallan, who's on maternity leave. And she asked about what they would do if they had all the powers that an independent Scotland would bring. Today we've got SNP leader Stephen Flynn who's going to give his address to conference, and tomorrow we'll have the closing speech will be delivered by Party Leader and First Minister John Swinney. Of course, the SNP are live streaming the national conference on YouTube, and they're putting full scripts of speeches are being posted on the SNP's website. But of course, you'll be better off watching here, because here on Broadcasting Scotland we'll be bringing you speeches live and interviews and insights from Edinburgh that you won't get anywhere else, so stay tuned here. So that's it for me. I'm going to hand you over to Douglas Mackenzie in Edinburgh, live at conference, where I hope the weather is as glorious as it is here in Glasgow, Douglas, and I believe you've got somebody lined up or is all ready for an interview. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you, Brian. Yes, I'm here in a very sunny Edinburgh. Not that we're getting much benefit behind the glass of the International Conference Centre, but I'm joined here by Martin Day. Welcome.
Hello.
I'm very interested in your impressions of the conference so far. Everyone has asked me, what is the mood? Well, I'll say, well, people are not walking around with long faces, so yeah. Is it positive?
I think despite one of our worst electoral defeats in recent history, the mood is actually very optimistic and very positive, because we have a cause to win. We know we've had a wake-up call and we're determined to take stock and make sure we come out fighting and secure the 2026 Scottish elections and then onwards to independence. So we've got a cause, we've got a unity, and there'll be some deep soul searching as to what went wrong and what we could do better, but it's a very positive process, and I'm delighted to be here and soaking up the atmosphere.
Good. Stephen Flynn began the week by saying that there shouldn't be finger pointing and we should be positive. Now, of course, the meeting yesterday was behind closed doors to discuss the election results. Do you feel there's been finger pointing, or if there's just been a look to the way ahead?
No, I think there was a lot of constructive points made during that session, not just during that session, because I think it was obviously an open mic event chaired by John Swinney, the party leader, but John has had a number of these smaller events around the country already, so he's really taking on board what the grassroots and the involved members are saying, and that's got to be really welcomed. It's a level of openness and transparency that we need going forward, and it's good to see it here on the conference floor.
Yesterday, the news has been reported by the Scottish media in different ways. The National took its front page to say that the SNP is willing to have a constitutional convention, which harks back to the days of devolution and the campaign for that. Whereas the other Scottish broadsheets picked up on Kate Forbes warning about high taxation in Scotland driving people away, and the Herald spoke about, with an opinion from the conference, that the SNP has got to win back the middle class to win the 2026 Scottish election. What were your main themes that you picked up yesterday? What got people excited?
Well, I think just to take the examples that you've highlighted, I think it shows the breadth of stuff that's been covered at the conference. You know, it's really welcome that we've got such a range of hot topics out there. For me, I think it is getting our message right on independence. That's why we're all here in the first place, and I think there's a lot of real positives there. And I think, yes, I would go along with, we need to get the wider movement all pushing in the same direction and working constructively.
Yeah, the highlight of this afternoon is probably Stephen Flynn's speech as the Westminster leader. We've had a little trail of it that he'll speak about Labour hammering. Okay, so we'll be going to that live very shortly.
Yep.
A quick comment on what you expect from it.
I think the message we need to get out to the public is that, you know, consequentials have consequences, and that's the effect when we're not making all our own decisions.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thanks.
And back to Brian in the studio and to go live. Keep talking. So, yeah, what do you expect Stephen to say this afternoon, and what he can do from Westminster?
Yeah, I think we'll see quite a strong, robust performance from Stephen. We always get one like that, and I think he'll be touching a lot of the buttons that we need to be pressing and highlighting. You know, I think there's already a feeling of buyer's regret from some of the public after the election, and I think we need to capitalise on that. So I look forward to hearing what he's about to say very, very shortly.
So basically, if you come down on the left-hand side, you'll see there's
Indeed, and he's always a very strong media performer, so I'm sure we'll hear a good speech for him. Do you expect him to address the and what went wrong?
I think it may be mentioned. I don't know what he's going to say, but we did have a full session on that yesterday. So I think certainly in the public session, this should be about going forward and the messages we need to get out there to rebuild.
So just wash the dirty linen in private.
In private, I think that's always a good practice.
Yes, indeed it is. And I mean, there are a number of different motions before conference this afternoon. One of them obviously is austerity and what can be done about it, and another one which is very much in the news at the moment is the drugs death and the suggestion of safe consumption rooms for drug users. Where's your interest in this afternoon's motions?
I think austerity is the big issue, and certainly for the last few years it was the biggest constituent basic caseload that we had, was different aspects of poverty. And that's only going to get worse with the government at Westminster sticking to Tory spending plans. So that's a key plank that we need to be addressing. Obviously, I would agree wholeheartedly with safe consumption rooms for the drug situation. We know that the previous practice hasn't worked. We need to do something radically different, and that is, I think, a key component to saving lives, and that's what it should be seen as, a health issue, not a criminal issue.
Yeah, and on austerity, there have been so many calls in the press of the Scottish government must do this to mitigate and spend money that it's not allowed to spend. How do we address that problem?
Well, I get a smile every time I hear my political opponents telling me that our government should be mitigating everything that Westminster's doing. If you think that, you should be arguing full on for independence and just making the decisions for yourself. And that's probably the message we need to get home. You know, it's I think if I have a criticism of our colleagues in Edinburgh, they've done too good a job of mitigating. People don't realise just how awful to direct Westminster rule would have been without them being there. So we need to get that message across to people that we've saved them from a lot of the misery, but you can only save people from so much. You cannot mitigate everything that Westminster does.
Yeah, there's certainly been plenty placards around highlighting the successes of the Scottish government. Free prescription charges, free tuition, baby boxes and so on. Do you think that the message is getting out to homes in Scotland, to people who are not dyed-in-the-wool members of the SNP?
I think those messages have got out to people, although I think we have a different problem. I think that these are all things we have accomplished, and people have now got so used to them, they've taken them as granted, part of the fabric of our society. What they really want to say is what else are we going to do going forward, and that's where we've got to get onto the agenda on the front foot.
A wee kindly reminder, or a not so kindly reminder, regarding some housekeeping. Keep your phones off, and if for any reason you have to leave this afternoon's proceedings, please do so quickly and quietly, with respect to those who are remaining in the hall. So without much further ado, conference, we all know that Westminster doesn't work for Scotland, and having strong SNP voices at Westminster is now more crucial than ever, as deeper austerity is implemented by the UK Labour government. In the weeks since the general election, we've seen the opposition prove that they can't be trusted to stand up for Scotland. Other political parties have given up holding the government to account at Westminster, but not the SNP. Friends, leading the SNP campaign at Westminster is our next speaker. His leadership on the cost of living crisis, on tackling child poverty, and giving a voice to the people of Gaza is a testament to the core values of our great party. So, conference, will you please welcome Stephen Flynn, MP.
Thank you all. You're so very kind as always. Now, conference, if you'll allow me, I actually want to begin my remarks with a personal congratulations. Just yesterday, my dad, the best man I've ever met, he became the leader of Dundee City Council. After a long and distinguished career as a toolmaker, no, forgive me. Sorry, Dad. After a long and continuing career as an engineer, he has taken the important responsibility of ensuring that a Dundee United fan remains in charge of Scotland's fourth city, maintaining an important natural order. Now, my wife will be sitting at home with my bairns right now, hopefully watching this, and will be rolling her eyes that I'm once again talking about the football. Because thanks to the Euros, it may have been mentioned once or twice over the summer in my house. As a proud European, I believe I backed 8 teams in total, even picking the winner. But friends, I'm afraid that this is where the success this summer mostly begins and ends, because there can be no hiding from the fact that I stand here today as the leader of a much smaller Westminster group. 8 short weeks ago, we lost dozens of good colleagues, and we lost the election. In this room, we all know and we all understand that hiding from that harsh reality will fix nothing, because the right response never lies in easy excuses. The only right response is rooted in reflection and responsibility. Because the brutal honesty of democracy means that we need to be brutally honest with ourselves. It wasn't our political opponents, and it wasn't the media who sent us a stark message at the general election. It was the people we serve. And when the Scottish people, the very same people who have previously placed their trust in us, send us a democratic message, the only right response is to listen and then to act. And those actions must involve change. The change of knowing that we must reroute ourselves in the priorities of the Scottish people, the priorities they are telling us we have moved away from. The change of knowing that the standards the public expect from the politicians, their politicians, are as high as they have ever been. The change of knowing that when you say you are going to do something, you deliver it. In committing to that change, let me be very clear about something else too. In a team, you don't point fingers. You accept that the mistakes of others are your mistakes too. Just as our recent results are our collective burden to bear, it is now our collective challenge to mend the trust that we have lost with the Scottish people. And collective change will only ever come from the individual actions we all now decide to take. Now, it was once famously written that everyone thinks of changing the world, but nobody thinks of changing himself. I think there's probably a fair degree of truth in that. And that is exactly the challenge and the change we all now face. Embracing the humility and honesty of defeat in order to renew our relationship with the Scottish people, showing that we can speak again to their aspirations and that we have the competence to deliver for them and their families, reimagining our offer and re-earning the right to represent them. And yes, still being honest with all of our people that we firmly believe that independence remains the road to a better future. That is a path to recovery for this party, but more importantly, that is a path to delivering for the people we serve. And friends, we must remind ourselves that whilst the sea has flowed back, our tide mark remains. And collectively, the SNP will not just rise to that mark again, but united we will surpass it. And that is the hope that must lead us forward together. The conference, for those many colleagues who lost their seats at the general election, I do want to take the chance to say this. The result was no reflection on their individual work. It was a consequence of circumstances far beyond their control. Because on fighting for Scotland's democratic right to choose our own future, on opposing Westminster Austerity, on calling out the madness of Brexit and rejecting the racist race to the bottom on migration, on stopping Boris Johnson's illegal lockdown of Parliament, on standing up for the WASPy women, and in being the first to call for a ceasefire in Gaza, our colleagues did this party and Scotland proud. In the often hostile environment of Westminster, they were Scotland's voice, and they were a voice to be reckoned with. And that's why their commitment to this party and movement is far from finished. But friends, it is also worth remembering that every election does have a silver lining. So up in Whisky Country, service is now being delivered by Graham Ledbetter. Whilst if you travel a little along the coast, Seamus Logan was a wee bit too concerned that Douglas Ross had one too many work commitments. And in fairness, I was there that night. I was there, and in fairness, it's worth saying that the only people happier than Seamus and his team that night were Douglas Ross's own colleagues. But friends, the palpable relief of getting rid of the Tories has been rapidly replaced with the stark reality of a new Labour government. And for a moment, let's give credit where it is due. There is no denying that Labour ran a very effective political campaign. And campaign slogans can be very powerful things. Change was a powerful, simple, and winning slogan. But for many people in Scotland and beyond, it was more than just a word. It was a promise. the promise of totally transforming the way in which politics works after 14 long years of the Tories. And it's that promise which is already being pulled apart. Because only 8 weeks on, that hopeful promise of turning the page on the Tories has been replaced with the new Labour promise of a painful politics. And we've already seen the preview. Keeping the two-child benefit cap, cutting the winter fuel payment, energy bills heading up 10%, and laying the ground for a new era of austerity. And the Prime Minister, the new Prime Minister, is all too eager to assure us that the worst is yet to come. You will all know that one of the oldest sayings in politics is that you campaign in poetry and you govern in prose. Labour's gone one step further. They've decided to campaign in poetry and govern painfully. From the poetic promise of change to things can only get worse. Taking a hammer to public services seems all too apt for the tool maker's son. Now, Conference, in fairness to the new government, politics is about choices. And all too often, those choices are tough. The Tories did trash the economy. They did leave a shocking inheritance. All of that is true. In fact, I think I even remember John Swinney saying that once or twice during the election campaign, or maybe I wasn't reading his lips properly. But the serious point is this. If politics is about choices, then there is a fundamental choice that all parties face during every election. And this summer, the public witnessed Labour's choice, deliberately choosing to say one thing to the public when asking for their votes, and cynically choosing to say the exact opposite just weeks after. And this Labour government will now have to live with the choices they have made. And I can assure you, friends, they deserve to be reminded of that choice each and every day, and that is exactly what SNP MPs in Westminster will do. And friends, I know I'm not the only one thinking that the early positioning of this new Labour government sounds all too familiar. For instance, listen to this. This budget is needed to deal with our country's debts. This budget is needed to give confidence to our economy. This is the unavoidable budget. Now, the accent may have been a terrible interpretation, but you would be easily forgiven that believing that those words were from Rachel Reeves these last few weeks. But they weren't hers. They actually belonged to George Osborne. He said them 14 years ago. So delegates, the Westminster roundabout has turned full circle. The same political lines and the same political choice to impose austerity. Rachel Reeves and George Osborne, the architect and the apprentice of austerity. And friends, as this new era of austerity has been announced in Westminster, what else has been put on offer for Scotland? A Secretary of State who siphons off £150 million into the Scotland office, whilst his very Chancellor picks £160 million from the pockets of our pensioners by cutting the winter fuel payment. In this very city, the new Labour government has had to cut nearly £1 billion from an AI project in Edinburgh University. And of course, we've got the establishment of GB Energy. Friends, that's a film that we have all seen before, is it not? Westminster casting its gaze north to Scotland's resources with pound signs rolling in their eyes. Well, let's remind them here and now that whilst they may brand it GB Energy, we all know that it is Scotland's energy. And while all this has been going on, what of Labour's man in Scotland? Well, I seem to remember very many carefully placed media articles promising that Anas Sarwar would be the first man to stand up to Keir Starmer and his government if he disagreed with their decisions. We were promised that he would be the hard man of Scottish politics and wouldn't be found wanting in standing up for Scotland. Well, it turns out that Anas Sarwar is less hard man and more hard man to find, because he's usually tucked away, is he not, trying to think of the latest excuse to justify another broken promise coming from his masters in London. In conference, on a serious note, in conference, when it comes to Anas and his arguments, I think it's time to put one thing to bed. If you are a unionist, if you believe that economic policy should be primarily set in London, please stop this nonsense that the economic and budgetary position in Scotland is somehow nothing to do with Westminster. You cannot on the one hand boast about the so-called broad shoulders of the union, whilst at the very same time wash the other hand of responsibility for the austerity that same union imposes. Labour are not being honest with the public about the seriousness of the situation we face, and the situation demands better. In fact, what it demands is experienced and principled leadership. Now, the new Prime Minister rightly talks about politics returning to the service of the people, and its absence in Westminster has been all too obvious for all of us. But the world does not begin and end inside the walls of Westminster. There have been politicians on these aisles who have always held true to the trust of genuine public service, because we all know that John Swinney is the living embodiment of a politics of service. All his adult life has been dedicated to the purpose of this party, alongside a clear-eyed commitment to his country and its future. There is no man There is no man who I would trust more to take us through these turbulent times. As someone once said, now is not the time for a novice. We are lucky to have him, and Scotland is all the better that he is leading us today. And friends, the patient and purposeful leadership of our First Minister should also inform our primary belief in independence, because it's that patience and purpose that will complete the last hard yards of realising that future. We should be honest. It has never been and never will be a seamless path to self-determination and independence. And at times over the last few years, we should probably admit that we were guilty of giving that impression. Now, I understand why that happened. Sometimes the non-stop nature of modern politics fed the strategy of one last push. But the intense immediacy of that narrative doesn't serve the need for patient persuasion of those who we still need to convince. And it does something else too. It distracts us from the bigger trends and the broader sweep of history. Because in truth, real and lasting patterns in politics aren't shaped and defined by any one day or by any one election. And when we step back for a moment, when we pause, the bigger pattern and the bigger picture of Scottish politics comes clearly into view. And it shows that amongst the massive electoral swings in Scotland since the independence referendum 10 years ago, there remains an underlying stability in Scottish politics that neither us neither of us, nationalists or unionists, have been successful yet in convincing the public, the overwhelming public, of the case for either independence or for the United Kingdom. Now, some people may present that as a negative, of the argument of being stuck. But in reality, I think it actually reflects a deep faith in Scottish democracy, the wisdom of a population who will decide our democratic future when they alone deem the time to be right. And in that context, we must always be willing to reach beyond our own comfort zones, beyond our own boundaries, to listen to and engage with those who do not yet share our vision. After all, friends, we must never lose sight of the fact that just as it is our Scotland, it is their Scotland too. And building a nation fit for the future is a responsibility that all of us together share. And conference, when we consider that bigger picture, we should always take heart and hope from the fact that half of our population still believes that independence remains the most desirable destination for Scotland's future. That remains an unprecedented opportunity, because in the ongoing argument between the Westminster status quo or a new Scotland, we still hold trust and faith that the strength of our argument will win the argument, and it will be our future. No matter how many speeches the new Prime Minister makes, the fundamentals won't change. There is no fixing the foundations of broken Britain with a Westminster migration policy that ignores its economic benefits and demonises some of the most vulnerable people on the planet. There is no fixing. There is no fixing the foundations of broken Britain when the first policy that goes in the Westminster political bin is real investment in green energy to drive green growth. And there is definitely no fixing the foundations of broken Britain if you won't even mention, never mind deal with, the ultimate financial black hole that is Brexit. But friends, the failures of Brexit Britain alone can't be our sole argument, and it shouldn't be our primary motivation. Because at times too, we have been guilty of straying from an optimistic and aspirational vision. Instead of resting and relying on the failures of the British state, the real motivation of our message must be the potential and possibility that Scotland is so rich in. We can't get stuck in the cycle of constantly lowering expectations instead of raising hopes. Our argument, our belief, and our offer to the Scottish people is that Brexit Britain is not as good as it gets. We believe that decisions made in Scotland for Scotland can deliver a better future for all of Scotland, that becoming a normal independent country in Europe can meet our people's needs and their aspirations, that it can deliver the basic belief that the next generation can and should aspire to a higher standard of living and a better quality of life than that which came before. These are simple things, friends, but they are the most important things of all. And that is a hopeful horizon we can offer and that we can argue for. And it's that hope, that optimism and that aspiration that must guide our response to the challenges we now face. Friends, that is the path to recovery. It is the route to real change, and ultimately it offers us the best road to independence. Thank you very much.
Right, conference, time to get the show on the road. You've heard what our leader of the Westminster Group has had to say, and we've all got work to do, and we've got work to do this afternoon as we now move to the resolutions. Now, we have a number of resolutions this afternoon, plus one extra resolution that we did not manage to attend to yesterday. So, I am looking for your full cooperation as we proceed this afternoon, and request that people work hard to maintain the time limits so that we're fair to everybody. So just one little word to draw your attention to. If you look at the resolution number 7 in terms of ending Westminster austerity, can I say that that resolution has not been proposed by Falkirk South Branch. It's actually proposed by Colette Stevenson, MSP, and Bob Doris, MSP. And with much apologies, there's been a printing error, so you can score out the last paragraph in that motion. So if you score out, it's on page 16, if you score out the last paragraph. So if, in terms of those people who are leaving, if you're able to do that quickly and quietly, that would be very much appreciated indeed. And can I invite Colette Stevenson, MSP, to come to the stage and please move the resolution. Can we have a warm welcome for Colette, please?
Thank you. Good afternoon, conference. The austerity regime imposed on us by successive UK governments has stifled our nation's potential. Since 2010, we have witnessed the devastating impact of Westminster cuts on our communities. Enough is enough. The austerity regime that has been imposed on Scotland for the past 14 years must end. Politics, as we know, is all about choices. And while successive UK governments have chosen austerity, the SNP has chosen to deliver a progressive tax system so that we can invest more in our public services and build a more socially just Scotland. Delegates, it was the SNP in government that created and rolled out the game-changing Scottish Child Payment. Recent Scottish Government statistics show that more than 325,000 children are benefiting from this payment of over £26 per child per week to help low-income families. Of course, our SNP government is working with one hand tied behind its back, so it is, with Westminster controlling most economic and welfare powers. We all know what the Tories are about. They were happy to slash public spending, introduce cruel welfare reforms, and watch more and more people fall into poverty. The human toll of this austerity is impossible to ignore. Under the Tories, we see the poverty rise to appalling levels. In fact, a UN Special Rapporteur concluded that the scale of poverty here is simply not acceptable and might actually violate international law. This is the harsh reality of Westminster's austerity policies. Thankfully, the Tories were booted out of Downing Street and change has arrived. We have a new Prime Minister and Chancellor, Labour politicians who hold the purse strings of the United Kingdom. But don't get too excited. There's a budget coming in October and it's going to be painful. Those are not my words, but those of the Labour Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer. Labour claims things are much worse than they thought. But our Finance Secretary, Shona Robison, and experts from the Institute for Fiscal Studies as well consistently warned Labour that their plans didn't add up. And after promising the world during the election campaign, Labour have finally realised that keeping Tory fiscal rules means that there is not enough money to spend on public services. We can see the writing on the wall. Westminster's priorities are not Scotland's priorities. So what are Labour plans? Keeping the Tories' abhorrent rate clause and two-child cap, claiming public spending is not sustainable, and asking all areas of government to find billions in savings. And of course, taking the winter fuel payment away from millions of pensioners.
1 minute.
Anna Sarwar promised that there would be no austerity under Labour Conference. Read my lips, and I want to labour this point. The UK Labour government is turbocharging austerity. And as we all know, it doesn't matter what party is in power, under Westminster system, some things will never change. Delegates, for me, I believe in independence because it is the best way for us to build a country with social justice at the heart of it. Confidence the SNP government is delivering for the people of Scotland. Our policies are keeping 100,000 children out of poverty this year. Given what we have managed so far, just imagine the positive change, the real change we will be able to deliver when Scotland has the full powers of independence. Please support the resolution. Thank you.
Thank you, Colette. Thank you, Colette. That was perfect timing. Can I now invite Bob Doris, MSP, onto the stage? Can we give Bob a wee warm welcome?
Conference. There are two things we must remind both UK Labour government and their branch office here in Scotland of. Now, they will both know these things very well, because we heard it repeatedly during the Labour election campaign, and that is cuts have consequences and continuity just won't cut it, and how right they were. What they didn't tell us was those cuts would be wielded by a Labour axe directly at Scotland's budget. Yes, Sir Keir Starmer and austerity Annis denied it to our faces. Yet the fizz was barely flat in the celebratory bubbles of the London Labour election victory when £20 billion of cuts were confirmed, and Labour's cuts have consequences. To our elderly in the form of cold weather payments scrapped for most, to our disabled and those out of work as Labour look to slash welfare protections, to those looking to have a decent home to stay in given the eye-watering slashing of our capital budgets. So yes, Sir Keir, on austerity Annis, cuts do have consequences, and shame on you and shame on Labour. We all know Labour is committed to following UK Tory fiscal rules and spending limits, and that continuity just won't cut it either. It's double-speak for austerity. Now, as deeply flawed as UK Labour are, thank heavens we no longer have the Tories. But is it any wonder the expression red Tories is increasingly used to describe Labour? Because cuts wrapped up in a Labour rosette are just as damaging. Conference. Politics is about setting priorities. However, those priorities have to be based on principles. The SNP's principles have prevented 100,000 children being placed in poverty. It has supported families with record levels of childcare. It's ensured learners from low-income households are far more likely to go to university than ever before. It's supported households to meet their rent to mitigate the bedroom tax, and despite all its self-evident challenges, it's ensured that NHS is the best performing in the United Kingdom. But, Conference, Labour austerity is putting at risk the gains of devolution. If devolution is now simply about trying to mitigate the worst aspects of Westminster rule under both Labour and Tory governments, then the case for independence has never been stronger. Now, we must build trust with all those who lent their vote to Labour or who stayed at home on July the 4th. And in doing so, forefront of rebuilding that trust must be to challenge austerity of UK Labour. It must be at the heart of it, because Labour cuts, they have consequences. Support this resolution, please, Conference.
Thank you, Bob, and impeccable timing. Much appreciated. Now, there is a card from Amy McNees-Meekin from the Leith Walk branch to propose the remit back. Before I invite Amy to the stage, I think it's worth me asking if we have a seconder for the remit back. Okay. Okay, great. Well, thank you very much, Amy. Okay, yes, great. Thank you very much, Amy. That is really, really helpful. Okay, right, so we have one speaker for the resolution, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome Graham Ledbetter, MP, to address the hall this afternoon. Graham, come and take your place.
Thank you, Chair, and friends. It's not my first conference as a delegate, but it is my first conference and my first speech as a Member of Parliament to conference. Before I get into the meat of the motion, I'd like to take the opportunity to thank all the activists who enabled that result in Murray Western and Strathspey. But I'd also like to thank all of the activists who worked for every single candidate across the whole of Scotland. We were fighting a really tough election. That's been well covered by other speakers. But the amount of effort that was put in by people around the doors all across Scotland was phenomenal. There are lessons for us to learn, and I am deeply sorry that I'm not going to be able to work with many people that I would have very much looked forward to working with. But I also want to thank them because many of them have approached me, congratulated me on my own victory, but also offered their support and help, and that says a great deal for their character. The election result was disappointing for us, but it did finally deliver an end to Tory rule that has decimated public services. 14 years of austerity. Austerity that simply means less money for the NHS, less money for education, less money for all the services that we value from our local authorities, and less money for key infrastructure, less money for all of the capital projects that the Scottish Government has aspiration and desire to build. And that is unacceptable. Across every part, I see public services that have been stripped bare because of harsh cuts imposed by the Tories. But then the experience of the last few weeks, and the one that sticks with me in Westminster, is Labour MPs, new Labour MPs from Scotland, lining up and cheering their Chancellor as she shouted repeatedly in her statement, "If we cannot afford it, we will not pay for it." Regardless of what they were saying that they wouldn't pay for, even when it came to the winter fuel allowance. I represent a constituency that has some of the coldest parts of Scotland, some of the highest energy bills, people who already pay an unfair level for the distribution of their energy, even though they are producing most of the renewable energy for the whole of the UK. That's ridiculous. It is unfair, it's discriminatory, and the removal of the winter fuel allowance and the funding for it has simply added more misery to people who are already suffering fuel poverty in those areas. All of these things together are an indictment on the Labour government that has taken office. And our job as MPs in Westminster is to hold them to account every single day for their failings. I commend the 7 MPs who broke the whip and voted for the SNP amendment. They actually stuck to their principles. It's time that the rest of the Labour Party did as well. Thank you, David.
Thank you very much, Graham. Ladies and gentlemen, there are no cards against. Really? Right, okay, please. Christy, you might be quicker coming that way, but... Right, no, there's a ramp the other side as well. Right. All right, okay, you can use the mic, Christine.
Is it on?
It's on.
Well, it's a hell of a thing doing it. I don't want to be another pain in the neck, which I already am. But I was concerned that you said that was only a card that was in to speak to that. Now, I had one in. I'm not seeking special privileges, but were there other cards in to speak? Because I've heard other people saying they're putting cards to speak and they've been told no other cards have been put in. I'm sure it's an error, not conspiracy.
It's an error.
Clarification.
I promise it's an error. Thank you. What is correct to say is that there are no cards against. So can I put it to conference that we accept this resolution by acclaim? Thank you very much. Now we are moving on to resolution number 8. That's the review of emergency service control in island and rural communities. And can I invite Chris Abel to come and move the resolution, please? Give Chris a welcome.
Good afternoon, Conference. Before I start, I want to pay tribute to our emergency workers who, to help their fellow citizens, place themselves in emotionally difficult and sometimes physically dangerous situations. I'm sure that you will join me in honouring and thanking them for the work that they do. I worked full-time as an island GP, so I'm going to talk about the emergency response that I know best. 25 years ago, if you were off the beaten track needing urgent out-of-hours medical help, you would telephone the local on-call GP. They had detailed personal knowledge of the geography, the community, and the services and skills available locally. They knew exactly where you were, how long it would take to travel, how difficult it might be to move you, and how long it would take to evacuate you for a specialist hospital treatment. They could organise an appropriate local response, usually by talking to people that they knew personally, aiming to minimise delay, knowing that this could lead to rapid deterioration and that the less time spent locally, the better the outcome would be. This is a very appropriate response for rural or island locations. Quick and flexible, it uses the people and skills available on the ground, and it is an efficient approach to the small number of emergencies which occur. It is just not reasonable to have the full range of emergency services sitting around in every remote community waiting to turn the blue lights on 8 or 9 times a year. Effectively, however, this flexible local response no longer exists. It is not supported by the protocols and guidelines which have been developed to manage demand in densely populated areas and which are now applied across Scotland. So, in 2024, if you are still looking for medical help from out in the sticks, you must dial 111 and your call will be dealt with at a national call centre. The assessor will have no detailed knowledge of your location, no understanding of the local difficulties or distances involved in travelling, no knowledge of the local resources available, and no appreciation of the time it might take to evacuate you. If a face-to-face consultation is recommended, 111 will tell you to travel to a central location or wait for a home visit. They will pass on your details to an out-of-hours service provider. These are independent organisations set up to relieve GPs of the requirement to provide out-of-hours care. They typically cover quite large areas and are often staffed by clinicians who have no detailed local knowledge and no local contacts. And you can't bypass 111 by calling 999. To ensure their very commendable, extremely rapid response, 999 calls are answered by the first available emergency operator, who could be anywhere in the UK. Again, they are likely to have no understanding of the remoteness of your location or the local resources available, and unless your problem ticks all the boxes on their emergency response protocol, you will just be referred back to 111. In remote and island situations, these arrangements do not necessarily work very well, and they cause significant problems. Misunderstandings about geography, locations, and travel times are common. Inappropriate advice and suggestions to use resources which are just not available may be given. The complex chain of information passing may lead to incomplete or misleading information. Frustration and anger often arise, and these can cloud decision-making. Most importantly, there can be delay, and it bears repeating that when we're dealing with serious illness, delay is dangerous. We think that this situation can and should be improved, and we ask Conference to support a call for a review of the way these services are provided in these locations. Thank you very much for listening, Conference, and I hope you'll support the resolution.
Thank you very much, Chris. And can I now invite Scott Curry, who's going to second the resolution. Hello, Scott. Warm welcome.
Conference, I wish to second this resolution by giving you a couple of examples to flesh out what Chris has just been saying. One major incident, and it's one of very many, that actually triggered this resolution was a friend who fell off a ladder in one of the remoter farms on Islay, badly smashing his ankle. Luckily, he was found by a couple of guys moving sheep. They knew not to move him, but they had no phone signal, so they drove a few miles till they got one, dialed 999, went through all the proper questions, and finally they were asked for the postcode, which of course they had no idea what the postcode was. They described in precise detail where he was, and they were then met with, well, where's Islay? At this point, they decided, okay, they abandoned that, drove back, manhandled him into the Land Rover, and in considerable agony drove him the very bumpy 15 miles to the hospital. I can report that a year and 7 operations later, he's still on crutches. Now, the ambulance service obviously gives the most kind of obvious and critical examples. And as a side effect, the locals will believe just about any rumour because of it. There's a recent death led to reports that the ambulance had been sent to Burnside on Jura instead of Burnside on Islay. That's total rubbish, but it's still circulating as a fact. However, this doesn't affect just the ambulance services. All the emergency services seem to operate similar protocols. We've had the police sent to Portnahaven instead of Port Ellen. Easy mistake to make, but they're 30 miles apart. Some of it on a single-track road. Another example, being awash with whiskey, Islay is also awash with whiskey tourists, and thus has a rather high incidence of drink driving. A concerned local reported a car leaving a hostelry where the driver had been witnessed drinking. And the police on the mainland were told to look out for it. There's a 2-hour ferry drive away. Okay, if I can end on a positive note, 2 of our members, in fact, you just heard from one of them, we're running a campaign to get people to know their What 3 Words address. If you don't know about What 3 Words, I don't have time to explain it, so look it up. It helps if you happen to have a phone signal, which of course doesn't cover everywhere. And by the way, if I or anyone else collapses at this podium, the What 3 Words for here, and I'm sure someone can make up a very good joke about this, are elite export shark. Thank you. Please.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Scott. And can I now invite Sandra Taylor to the podium. Sandra's going to speak for the resolution. Sandra's also from the Isla Jura and Colonsay branch, and I believe that Sandra is a retired Island GP. You've got 3 minutes, Sandra. That's true.
Good afternoon, Conference. I'm speaking in support of this resolution, and I'd like to describe another couple of true cases from an island. Both illustrate the difficulties which can arise with the imposition of a one-size-fits-all emergency response. The first case involved an elderly person who fell at home one evening. Although there were no obviously worrying injuries, they were unable to get off the floor. The 999 service did not consider this an emergency, and although the island ambulance was available, it was designated as only for emergencies. They suggested the person contact the local falls service. There is no falls service on the island, no on-call care service, no overnight district nurse service, no volunteer first responders. The person remained on the floor all night, at risk of dehydration, incontinence and pressure sores, until the daytime ambulance crew attended at 9 a.m. The second case is that of a person who developed an infection and was at risk of sepsis. They were advised to go to the local community hospital, but did not fulfil the criteria for an emergency ambulance. They were unable to find friends, family, or a taxi, and the island does not have community transport, volunteers, or any patient transport. By the time the doctor was finally notified and visited them, the patient had become more unwell and required emergency transfer. These cases demonstrate the dangers of delay when strict mainland protocols are applied. The protocols may be fit for purpose in urban areas, but not where people are scarce and services thinly spread. We hope a review may lead to local flexibility and use of available resources to provide appropriate and holistic responses in remote areas. Please support this resolution. Thank you. On time.
Conference, there are no cards to speak against or indeed remit back, and can I put it to you that we accept this resolution by acclaim? So, very well done to Isla Jura and Colonsay branch. Just can I say to Conference that before our next session I am hoping to deal with two remaining resolutions. Number 9 as tabled, but also resolution 4 that we didn't get to yesterday. Obviously I appreciate there's much demand to speak, but we're making constant judgments about where the most demand is, so please bear with us. Now, in terms of resolution 9, tackling the drugs death crisis, certainly something very close to my heart. Can I invite Neil Gray, MSP and Cabinet Secretary for Health and Social Care, to propose this resolution? You have a very strict 5 minutes, Cabinet Secretary, and if Audrey can be on standby to second. Neil.
Thank you very much indeed, Angela, Convener. Thank you. Conference. Before I speak to the resolution before us in earnest, let me take a moment to acknowledge and offer strength to our Minister for Drug and Alcohol Policy, Christina McKelvey. Friends, I don't need to tell you, Christina is the best of us. She is a wonderful colleague. She is a committed nationalist, a diligent MSP and a compassionate minister. She has been there for many of us, and now we need, and she deserves, our love and strength now as she battles cancer again. I'm sorry she's not here to bring her knowledge, her passion, commitment to the stage for such a challenging issue. But let me also say, as I introduce this resolution, that every life lost to a drug dependency is a tragedy. And my heart goes out to every family member who has lost a loved one over the past year. I cannot comprehend that pain, that suffering, that trauma, often lived over many years, seeing your loved one deteriorate and feeling the desperation to get them help, but also the anguish as they continue to suffer that dependency. It is for those with a drug dependency now and their family members desperate to get them help that we must do more and must give them hope. As the resolution underlines, no matter how we cut it, no matter how we measure it, Scotland's drug-related deaths are unacceptably high. We could point to the impact of poverty. That is clear in the statistics that were published recently. And recognise the impact of deindustrialisation in communities that I and many others in this room represent. But we must ease the harm. We must save lives now. The Scottish Government's national mission is at its halfway mark, and I believe we are on the right course in choosing the areas to focus our attention on. Taking a public health approach, not a criminal justice route, investing in residential rehab. We are on track to meet our target of 1,000 people a year getting access to Resi Rehab as part of our £250 million national mission. We know that when someone suffers an opioid overdose, that naloxone can reverse that opioid in their system and save their life. We were the first country in the world to implement a national naloxone programme, and thanks to our rollout, we know that hundreds of doses have been administered by military services staff, but also by volunteers, saving lives. We have ramped up the delivery of our medication treatment standards, and there is more to come, as the first safe consumption room will open in Glasgow in October. We are investing millions of pounds in community organisations, giving people with a drug dependency and their families hope, but also value and validation. And we, by any measure, have stepped up investment, expanded support, saved lives, but the death rate shows that we need to do more. And Conference, we are facing new and more dangerous challenges. Synthetic opioids are more potent, more dangerous, and their use is on the increase in Scotland. Benzodiazepines are becoming more and more prolific, complex and dangerous, and the number of deaths involving multiple drug use now sits at 8 in 10 of all of those that have died. And Conference, that's where we know the UK government must finally step up. We need their action, their support, to deliver the drug testing facilities we want to see in Aberdeen, in Dundee and in Glasgow. Like the safe consumption rooms, the drug testing facilities are about reducing harm, about making sure that until somebody with a drug dependency is ready to accept that help to end that dependency, that they are reduced from harm. Drug testing facilities allow us to detect dangerous substances on the street and use Public Health Scotland's radar, the rapid action drug alerts, to warn people with a drug dependency and save lives. That is what happened with xylazine, veterinary tranquilizer that was found in supplies. Conference, Labour must act to give us the powers we need to save lives. Audrey Nicholl will cover this in more detail. Finally, Conference, I'll leave you this message of hope. When I visited the Skylark Recovery Project in Dumbarton, I was privileged to meet mothers who had lost children to drug dependency, and some who were supporting their children now with a drug dependency. They were volunteering their time at Skylark to help others, to show other parents they are not alone, to ease the stigma and offer help. They told me that the greatest change that has happened over recent years, thanks to the interventions of the likes of Angela and Elaine and others, was the reduction in stigma, that the help is out there. And that is what we must give people. Conference is the hope and the message, the help is there, go and seek it. Please support the resolution.
Invite Audrey up to the stage, please. Quickly. 2 minutes. Audrey. 2 minutes. Spoke over.
Conference, good afternoon, and can I echo Neil Gray's comments and send our love and best wishes for a full and speedy recovery to our friend and colleague Christina McKelvey. Conference, on this International Overdose Awareness Day, we acknowledge every death from drug harm as a personal tragedy. And of course, we're here today in the shadow of an increase in recorded drug deaths, reflecting the tripwires those living with drug harm continue to face and the complexities of the effort to tackle drug harm and reduce drug deaths. And today I want to focus on law reform. I've been encouraged by the evidence, As in 2022, as convener of the Criminal Justice Committee in the Scottish Parliament, I brought my committee together with health and social justice colleagues to scrutinise the Scottish Government response to the recommendations made in the Scottish Drugs Deaths Task Force report, Changing Lives. And I've been encouraged by the evidence that we've taken from experts, practitioners and people living with drug harm who've highlighted the progress being made in the treatment and prevention space, but have pulled no punches about the investment and implementation work required to bring about sustained change in Scotland. And among the many areas for action in the Changing Lives report, it said this about the law. And I quote, "For far too long, people who use drugs and their families have suffered the effects of discrimination and stigma in society. They've been demonised, criminalised and ignored. And shamefully, discrimination is even enshrined in UK law, which actively discriminates against people with drug dependency in crucial areas of human rights." And it concluded that a review of legislation is urgently needed to support a public health approach in Scotland. And in response, the Scottish Government sought to work constructively with the UK Government to amend the legislation or devolve powers to Scotland. And this has been dismissed outright. Now, Scotland has two governments in this complex space, one that seeks to apply an evidence-based public health approach in line with international calls to put people and human rights front and centre. The other continues to apply unevidenced and harmful measures that criminalise the most vulnerable, using 50-year-old legislation that does not work. It feels to me like one government, the Scottish Government, is doing the heavy lifting. So, Conference, in closing, I urge you to support the resolution and call on the UK Labour Government to urgently reform legislation, bringing it into line with internationally recognised approaches that ultimately save lives. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Audrey. And we have two cards in to support the remit back. The first card to propose the remit back came from Councillor Norman MacLeod. So if I could invite Councillor MacLeod to the podium, and then Christine Graham, if she doesn't mind, can second the remit back. You've put, yeah, it's the wrong one. Another error, I know. Yeah, you'll be giving me a row. I'll be getting 6 of the belt off Christine Graham. Norman.
Thank you, Convener. Colleagues, good afternoon. I would wish to see our country leading in the matter of the use of what are presently illegal drugs. And I do so with the utmost sincerity and not for fun, because there are too many lives being lost for it to be fun. The so-called war on drugs was lost about 50 or 60 years ago. But there's certainly a war still going on. You've only got to look at the statistics in some of the South American countries, whether it's Mexico and the drug gangs and so on and so forth, but also in some of our towns and cities. Prohibition does not work. If there's a demand for something, if you'll forgive the phrase, the market will find a way of delivering it. At the moment, what we're saying is, if you have a demand for relaxing or mind-altering drugs, well, you need to go and get it from criminals. The criminals are making lots of money out of this. Even within this resolution, we can see, oh, well, safe consumption. But where do the poor folks have to get the drugs from? From the street. And goodness knows what's in there. So, alcohol, dangerous, easy to get addicted to, between 10 and 20%. Cigarettes, the same, probably more addictive. Cigarettes and tobacco. Gambling, most certainly between 10 and 20% will end up addicted. Similarly with using these drugs. But for alcohol, for tobacco, and for gambling, we control it, we license it, and we keep the criminals out by allowing the lawful purchase. I realise this is maybe controversial, but I truly wish you to think about this. If you would do away with, somebody pled guilty the other day to street value £100 million worth of cocaine. Don't forget, until the mid-1960s, you could actually go into a pharmacist and buy heroin. The demand's there. Let's fulfill the demand through our health services, and let's take the criminals out of it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor MacLeod. Do we have a seconder for the remit back or not? Yeah. Where? Yes. Okay, we do. I see it. I see it. We've got a number. Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. Okay, right. We have, could I invite Councillor Alan Casey? Sorry, struggling to read people's handwriting. Councillor Casey wants to speak for the motion and is now doing the 100-metre sprint down to the front of the hall. I know Councillor Casey has been very involved in this issue in the City of Glasgow. Alan, over to you. 3 minutes.
Thank you, Convener. I don't want to run too fast in case I lost my breath there. I just want to associate the earlier remarks about a colleague, Christina, and I do wish her well in her recovery, hopefully, moving forward. Thank you, Conference, for allowing me to speak on this today. And this motion is a deeply difficult topic and discussion for us as a party and as a country. And as been stated, it's such an important topic to be discussing this on International Overdose Awareness Day. Sadly, our country is still losing far too many people to a preventable drug-related death, and quite honestly, the scale of it should shame us all. We must strive to do everything in our power to deal with this crisis immediately, because simply we cannot afford not to. One death to a preventable drug death is one death too many. In Glasgow, I am the councillor with lead responsibility over drug and alcohol policy, and as Conference has heard, I am delighted that Glasgow has finally won the battle to open Scotland and indeed the UK's first safer drug consumption facility. After many years of campaigning, many motions at this conference and indeed in our council chambers and the Scottish and UK parliaments, we are now just a number of weeks away from being able to open this vital facility. And this was in position from the UK government and indeed the UK Home Office. And despite all of the, overwhelming evidence, to show how vital this facility will be, Glasgow's consumption room will open on the 21st of October this year, and I really, really do hope it turns the tide in terms of some of these drug-related deaths. However, colleagues, we do know that a safe drug consumption facility is not a silver bullet, and it has to work alongside many other initiatives to really tackle this drug death crisis. And that is why myself and Glasgow City Council fully endorse the Scottish Government's plans to take a fully public health approach to tackle this crisis and supports the full decriminalisation of drugs for personal use. Conference, the war on drugs has never worked, and criminalising those with an addiction or forcing them into recovery when they're not ready just simply keeps people in the cycle of addiction. And by putting them through the criminal justice system just makes that road to recovery even harder. In fact, Conference, I somewhat agree with Norman, but I think there should have been an amendment put in on this motion about looking at full legalisation, and that's where we should have debated that, but I don't believe that's for today, and I really want us to obviously support this motion today. I on behalf of Glasgow, are working with a number of European cities looking at best international evidence when it comes to full legalisation and regulation, but that's a debate we should be having another day, and we should be getting fully behind this motion. Conference, we need to be more radical than ever before, and as we know, what we're doing just now isn't enough and it's not working. I would urge the Scottish Government to push the boundaries on advocating for serious drug reform at UK levels as much as possible. Glasgow has shown at a local level we can really make that change, and I hope the Scottish Government can follow our lead. Thank you very much, Conference.
Colleagues, we're now moving to summing up. Councillor MacLeod, do you have anything you wish to add? Yes, please. No problem.
First of all, if I may, friends, Councillor Anne Casey, who's just spoken, makes a very fair point. It would have been much better for me to have submitted an addition or an amendment to this rather than this procedure. I apologise to you, Alan, and to the proposers and seconders for not doing so. I'm not going to run through excuses about general elections and the aftermath and all the rest of it. I could have done it. I failed. I apologise. I'll be content. Maybe some of you would like to. I'll be content if the remit back is defeated, frankly, but would some of you like to vote for it and show at least an indication that the lawful supply of these sort of dangerous drugs would be the same as the lawful supply of alcohol, which is in many ways equally dangerous, but at least it's not run by criminals. Finally, and in relation to what's been thrown at us, and I would invite the proposer, who knows about these things because he's a relevant overall minister. I have heard it alleged that the reason that our statistics in Scotland, one death's too many incidentally, but our statistics are frighteningly high, is that we count as a drug death anyone who dies who's got an illegal substance in their system. In other places, they only count it as a drug death if it's the illegal substance that directly leads to the death. No wonder that these figures are not the same. Please give consideration. We lawfully meet the demand for gambling. I don't gamble. For alcohol, I don't drink. For tobacco, I don't smoke cigarettes. And no, I don't take drugs other than those that my GP gives me. Nonetheless, at the moment, if I want these things that somebody's then going to test for me, I've got to go to criminals. And that includes going to the consumption centre. Let's think seriously about taking the criminals out of this market. Thank you, friends.
Thank you, Norman. Neil Gray to sum up for the motion.
Thank you very much indeed, Angela, and thank you to all those who have contributed to this debate. Thank you to Norman, to Audrey, to Alan, and to Alan for his work in getting us to the place where we are going to see the first safe consumption room in the United Kingdom established and working in October. Norman is absolutely right. One death is one too many, and we must be doing everything that we can to reduce harm, to protect people from the drug dependency and offer the support that allows them to move away from that dependency. He is also correct that we do measure our drug death statistics differently, but that still does not explain or account for the fact that ours are much higher. We have a problem that we must address, and the government is committed to doing exactly that through our national mission. The final thing to say is I think Norman himself accepted that the issues with which he put in a very forceful case and a very persuasive case is a debate to be had another day. And I think today we need to accept the resolution before us. We need to back the Scottish Government in the work that we are doing. And yes, as Audrey said, keep the pressure on the UK Government to reform drug laws, short of us having the powers ourselves to take the action that is required. Please support the resolution.
Thank you very much, Neil. Delegates, we are now moving to voting, and can I ask those who wish to vote for the remit back to raise their hands and show their cards visibly and clearly. Okay. Put your hands down. And can I ask those who wish to vote against the remit back to put their hands up? Okay, thank you, Conference. That's very clear. The proposer to remit back falls. And we now move to voting for the resolution as itimated. Hands up, all those for the resolution. Hands down. And any cards against? We've got a few. Thank you very much. That motion is overwhelmingly passed. Thank you for your cooperation, Conference. Right. Okay, now we are moving swiftly on, friends. We have some catch-up from our business yesterday, which is Resolution 4, around the effective use of tax powers. There is a number of cards in this, so I will ask people to strictly adhere to the time limits. And Simon Barrow from the Leaf branch is going to speak for the resolution.
Thank you very much. I'm also speaking as Secretary of the Trade Union Group. Conference, yesterday our party leader and First Minister spoke honestly about the challenges of public finance and the need for fresh thinking. This motion is exactly about that. It's about challenging the deeply damaging austerity mentality of the new UK Labour government following on from the Tories. It's about further creative use of our, yes, limited tax and revenue powers under devolution in order to defend high-quality public services, decent paying conditions and vital investment in Scotland's infrastructure and just transition towards a green industrial future. It will allow SNP councillors to look service users and employees straight in the eye. By passing this motion, we will be signalling a willingness to work in partnership to try and identify short-term to medium-term mitigations and solutions. Because, Conference, there is a mighty autumn budget crunch coming at Holyrood, a potential £250 million worth of cuts. Scotland's capital budget is forecast to fall by 20% in real terms over the next 5 years, a direct result of unnecessary UK fiscal decisions, and this at a time when public services are, we know, struggling and investment needs to be drastically scaled up to deliver net zero. Labour at Westminster are a massive part of the problem, but blaming them is not enough. Our own words have to be matched by actions. We have to do all within our limited devolved power to deliver the people of Scotland, not just tomorrow, but now, so showing what a future fully in our own hands would look like. I'm delighted that the General Secretary of the Scottish Trade Union Congress, Ros Foyer, has personally backed this motion. She'll be speaking at the Trade Union Group Fringe on Sunday. Our STUC friends have done fantastic work in looking at how additional revenue of up to £3.7 billion can gradually be released. This motion sets out some of that, continuing the good work of the Scottish Government in pushing up the higher rate of income tax a little, credible possibilities for a regionally applied tax on extreme wealth. We can do that within devolution, giving local authorities the financial breathing room they need to make better locally accountable decisions, speeding up reform of local authority finance, including replacing the council tax with a new residential property tax related to actual value. It's vitally important to allay fears you may have, delegates, and to counter the nonsense of the right-wing press, to stress that this motion is not, I repeat, not about increasing the taxes of lower and middle income earners. It's about revenue from wealth and assets, including land and buildings, in the hands of the wealthiest, who by definition can afford to pay a bit more to contribute their fair share so that we all prosper together. And research from the LSE has shown that it's a myth that the better off will flee if they have to contribute a little more, just as it was a myth that the minimum wage would lead to economic disaster. Conference, we are right to attack the hypocrisy and failings of Westminster Labour, who promised Scotland an end to austerity and are now immediately betraying that promise. But, and this is crucial, we must respond from a position of strength and positivity by showing that we are doing the very best with what we have now, that we are listening to our partners in the community, to people who are listening to this debate right now, who are struggling with health and education and housing and other things and wonder how they're going to get through, to those who are producing great ideas that we can take into account, and therefore how much more, of course, could be achieved with the full powers of independence. This is about sending Conference a clear signal alongside millions of ordinary people about the direction we need to head in. Please support the motion and let's continue to work together for a Scotland worth believing in.
Thank you very much, Simon. And in terms of the seconder, Vicky Nicholson has submitted a card to second. I wonder if, Vicky, with your consent, given that time is short, whether you would agree to formally second the motion. Just a question. Is she here? Oh, come on, Vicky. Come on. Warm welcome, Vicky.
Thanks very much. Well, I'm honoured to second this constructive motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vicky. That is very kind of you. Now, I have two cards in for the remit back. The first card to be submitted was David McNee from the Edinburgh West branch, and we have another request to remit back from Christine Graham, and I wonder if Christine Graham would be content to second and to forgo her right to speak. No, she's shaking her head, right. Okay, Vicky, you were too kind. You should just have told, you should just have shook your head. Shook your head, Vicky. Aye. It was worth a try. It was worth a try. David McNee, would you like to make your way to the podium, please? And David's from Edinburgh West, and he's going to lay out the reasons for the remit back.
Conference, I'm not going to ask you to remit this resolution back because it goes too far, but because it doesn't go far enough. While great in many regards, it completely lacks a commitment to progressive taxes. Progressive taxes must be for everyone, and good intentions aren't enough. We need a concrete commitment. A commitment to a progressive tax burden in Scotland, where the top pays more than the middle and the middle pays more than the bottom. It should be simple, but good intentions aren't enough. It needs that commitment. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, David. And if I can invite Christine Graham onto the stage, please. Thank you, Christine. And Christine, you have a strict 3 minutes. Very strict.
This isn't a trivial question to remit back, and it's not revenge for my lost card previously. I want you to look at paragraph 3, and it says, in order to mitigate. Now, our solution here, and I've much to commend in this, but the solution here, broadly speaking, is to increase taxes on the Scottish public to deal with cuts, bigger cuts, coming down the line from Tory light Sir Keir Starmer. Why should we be doing that? Why should we be doing that? We have mitigated enough. We have had no thanks from the Scottish public. The bedroom tax, mitigated. The Scottish child payment, great policy, mitigating poverty imposed on the Scottish people by 14 years of Tory austerity, to be continued now by Sir Keir Starmer. My problem is mitigate. An end to mitigation is such a shame it's there. I ask you to remit back. We should not mitigate any longer. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christine, and very, very straight to the point. We now move to summing up. Can I check to see whether David McNay wishes to exercise his right to sum up? No. Okay, thank you, David. And therefore, can I invite Simon who I think is making his way. He's going to sum up. Thank you, Simon.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry that you didn't get a chance to hear from Vicky Nicholson, who is the new depute leader of the SNP group on Edinburgh Council, and one of a huge number of councillors that we have talked to who regard this motion as vital, because they are the people who, as I said in my earlier speech, have to look people directly in the eye. Conference, I sympathise with the idea that this motion may not go far enough. So let's adopt this motion and then look at how we move from there. But this is about moving forward. Likewise, it's absolutely appalling that we have to mitigate for Tory and now Labour cuts. But remember, this is people's lives. They will not look at us if we say it's Labour's fault and we're not going to step in. And this motion, Conference, mentions mitigation because we are being honest with the Scottish public, unlike some other parties, but it is largely about generation of new resources, the dialogue about that, the willingness of the Scottish Trade Union Congress, representing hundreds of thousands of workers across Scotland, to actually engage with us on this task of looking at how we squeeze some more and then show precisely why we need the urgent powers of independence to go further. So, Conference, we have a simple choice here. We have a choice of remitting back. You remember when Labour used to abstain when the life got tough and they didn't want to face the decisions? Let's not be abstainers. We're not a party of abstainers. And even worse, if we vote against, we're saying that we don't want to listen and engage. I don't believe that's the mood of this party. I believe that you will reject abstentionism and negativity and instead vote for this positive step forward. Thank you.
Simon. Conference, we are now proceeding to vote. Can I ask those who are in favour of the remit back, those who wish to vote for the remit back, to raise your hands with your cards clearly visible? Okay, hands down. And can I ask those who wish to vote against the remit back to raise their cards? Okay, Conference, that's pretty decisive. The remit back falls. Now, turning to the resolution, can I ask those in favour of the resolution to raise their cards? Hands down. And can I ask those who are against the resolution to raise their cards visibly? Thank you very much, Conference. Thank you for your forbearance. Your abstention is noted, Christine. Your abstention is noted. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, Conference, thank you very much for your forbearance. We have managed to make some good progress in terms of catching up with our important resolutions. It is imperative that if resolutions are accepted by the Conference Committee, that we do our best to address those in the hall. Obviously, that does put some challenges on us all. Now, I'm going to hand over to the National Secretary, who is going to chair the next set of proceedings, which is our second policy discussion. And can I invite Shona Robison to come to the stage.
Okay. Afternoon, Conference. There is absolutely no doubt at all that these are the most challenging times that we have known in Scotland since our Parliament was reconvened in 1999. And one of the last acts of a failed Tory government was to impose a budget on us in the spring that utterly failed to deliver the funding that Scotland needs this year. And the simple truth is that the last 14 years of Tory Westminster rule have seen austerity resulting in less funding for Scotland's public services. We have repeatedly called for increased capital funding to support investment in our vital infrastructure, to help our NHS and to fund the delivery of more affordable housing. But our block grant for capital is now expected to reduce in real terms by almost 9% by 27-28, a cumulative loss of over £1.3 billion. Imagine how many more affordable housing we could build with £1.3 billion. Conference, we might have expected a different approach from the new UK Labour government. We might have expected that 8 weeks into their term there would be some hope, some sign that things indeed might get better. Instead, we've had the new Chancellor, or as Stephen Flynn called her, George Osborne's apprentice, trying to express surprise at discovering that there's an overspend of over £22 billion in the public finances, which begs the question, where did she spend the UK election? Because it was made very clear, time and time again, that their and the Tory spending plans created a big black hole of £22 billion in the public finances. At every opportunity, SNP election candidates, SNP ministers, and of course our own First Minister in particular, told them and called it out over and over again. Now, it's a shame Labour wasn't listening, but of course they didn't want to be honest with the public. Just this week, Conference, the new Chancellor showed just how little anyone in Labour appears to understand Scotland and indeed how devolution works. She tried to claim that the Scottish Government was spending more than it was bringing in, and that was now leading to the difficult financial situation that we have. So let me offer this wee lesson in fiscal policy to Rachel Reeves. The Scottish Government legally has to balance its budget and has done every single year for 17 years. Every year. And we will do so again, but it's going to be tough. And it is the decisions that Labour have made in those 8 short weeks since coming to power that will fundamentally damage our ability to deliver public services in Scotland. If Labour actually wanted to help Scotland invest more in public services, then give us the borrowing and fiscal powers to allow that to happen, instead of sticking to Tory fiscal rules. Now, the Chancellor has done one thing that we welcome. I'm a fair person, so let me point out that one thing. In deciding to accept the findings of independent pay reviews for health staff and teachers at long last, the UK Government is prepared to acknowledge what the SNP and Government has long promoted and practised, that public sector workers are entitled to fair pay. And that's why, Conference, so many of our workers here, including teachers, nurses and police officers, have the highest starting salary level in the UK. So it's welcome. It's welcome, as this acknowledgement of the value and worth of public sector workers is. What is much less welcome is that Labour have not committed to fully funding the awards with more resources, but instead effectively through cuts. And because of how public financing works under devolution, this, of course, ties our hands. Conference, I know you know this, but we need to say this over and over again to our fellow citizens, that for as long as we don't have our independence and the powers of a normal country, our public services will be beholden to the whims of Westminster. As the UK Health Secretary said during the election, he let the cat out of the bag. All roads lead to Westminster. And Conference, perhaps worst of all, was the sight just this week of a Labour Prime Minister standing up in his garden and telling us that things are going to get worse and that the autumn budget is going to be painful. No wonder, after just 8 weeks, a majority of Scots now believe that Starmer doesn't understand Scotland and that less than half who voted Labour in July feel better off. The political headwinds show that with Westminster in control of Scotland's budget, no matter whether the Tories or Labour are in charge, Scotland will be worse off. With limited fiscal powers under devolution, that leaves our government with few places to go. And let me assure you, despite what Scottish Labour like to pretend, we don't have a magic money tree at Holyrood. So the priority for me and my colleagues, particularly Cabinet colleagues Jenny Gilruth in Education, Neil Gray in Health and Angela Constance in Justice, the challenge that we are all wrestling with is this: how do we protect and enhance the public services that everyone in Scotland needs, relies on and deserves, with less money available to provide them? It means that we need to look again at how and what we do to make sure that the money we do have works harder and smarter, and that we are laser focused on delivery of the priorities for the people of Scotland. We need to learn from the innovation in services going on around the country, especially in SNP-run councils. In my own city of Dundee, there's what is known as the Pathfinder project, which has public agencies effectively taking their badge off, working together to support families into work and out of poverty. In the city of Glasgow, there's creative work going on to reduce the number of children going into care. And as someone who worked formally in the city of Glasgow in social work, it has transformed the lives of some of our most vulnerable families, and they should be commended for the work that they've done. Labour appears to have forgotten that in its headlong rush to out-Tory the Tories, that there is more to government, what we know, there is more to government than slashing and burning public services. Rather than bring change, Labour is seeking to short-change Scotland, and we need to point that out to every single member of our fellow citizens in this country. Conference, I know that people sent us a strong message at the last election. There's no denying that. We need to earn the right to be heard by delivering on people's priorities. That includes improving public services so people get the service they need when they need it. But we also need to be better as a party and as a government at telling our own story of what we do well. In Scotland, we have more teachers per head of population, more nurses and midwives, more police officers, more dentists and more GPs. Only in Scotland does every young person under 22 get free bus travel. Only in Scotland does every family expecting a newborn receive a baby box. Only in Scotland do low-income families get £26.70 for every child as part of our actions to lift children out of poverty. And Conference, that is keeping 100,000 children out of poverty. Only in Scotland does every person who needs it get free personal care, and only in Scotland does every Scottish student at university get free tuition. And it is only because it is the SNP in government here in Scotland that any of this is still in place, and it will only remain in place as long as the SNP is in power. So, Conference, that is a story worth telling. And if we don't tell it, no one else is going to tell it. So we need to tell that story time and time again on the doorsteps and in every channel we can take. There's no doubt that continued Westminster austerity threatens all that we've achieved to date and our plans for the future. It prevents us from delivering the kind of country we believe that people want to live in. And it demonstrates that the need for Scotland to become independent has never been greater. And of course, we have the economic catastrophe of Brexit. And you might think, would you not, that Labour, having discovered that £22 billion black hole at the heart of UK finances, might be looking for obvious solutions to that problem. So when we're being told that Brexit has resulted in £40 billion in lost revenue, you might think that Labour could see that rejoining the EU, for example, might just be one such solution. But here's the simple truth. Labour doesn't want the better future for Scotland that we want. If they did, they would want to create a future of hope and ambition where Scotland gets the powers, including the fiscal ones, it needs to achieve the higher living standards and the fairer society that are enjoyed by independent European nations just like us. Conference, the SNP will always, no matter how tough it gets, always stay true to our values amid that Westminster austerity. And by working together as a party, by focusing outwards, not inwards, by prioritising what matters to the people of Scotland and setting out how we might use the powers of independence that will improve the services people care about, including the NHS, education and justice. Then, I believe, Conference, we will convince a clear majority of our fellow citizens that independence is, of course, the best future for their country. Thank you.
So thank you for joining this panel. just double check here. I think the first thing we're kicking off is for each of the CABSECs to explain the priorities, the key priorities in their portfolios at the moment. Jenny, do you want to start?
Thank you, Lorna. Thank you, Conference, and thank you, Shona. Delegates, we're gathered here today at what is still an undoubtedly challenging time for Scotland's schools. Ask any teacher and they'll tell you that we're still in a period of recovery from the pandemic. And as Education Secretary, my job is to help them in that process. Now, over the course of this parliamentary term, I'll be taking forward reforms to our qualification system and also introducing new legislation which will replace the SQA. I'll also be working with Scotland's councils and helping to address some of the challenges that we're seeing around behaviour and attendance post-pandemic. So I'm very aware of the need to drive constant improvement in Scotland's schools. But let's not lose sight of what we're achieving in education, because even after 14 years of Westminster Austerity, we're investing record amounts in Scotland's education system. So let's tell that story that Shona spoke to. We invest more per pupil and we have more teachers per head than any other part of the UK. We've got the best paid teachers anywhere in these islands. In our primary schools, the most recent and comprehensive data shows that attainment is at a record high in both literacy and numeracy. Since we came into government, the number of schools in good or satisfactory condition has grown from around 60% to more than 90%. Free school meals have been extended. There's been a massive expansion in childcare. And since we came to office, around 700,000 students in Scotland have benefited from our commitment to free tuition. That's a record of achievement that our party can be proud of. Now, that's what we've achieved during 14 years of Labour and Tory austerity from Westminster. Just imagine what we could achieve with independence. Rather than dealing with an attainment gap as a consequence of child poverty, we would be able to take immediate action to wipe it out. We could take decisions to invest even more in our schools, supporting our hard-working teachers even further. And we could create a society that offers a vision of hope to our young people, rather than the relentless misery and decline on offer from this Labour or past Tory unionist governments. That's what this party does best, and even in what, as Shona has said, will be difficult times ahead, that is exactly what we will continue to do for the benefit of Scotland's future.
Thank you, Jenny. Neil, if we can come to you now.
Thank you very much indeed, Lorna. Conference, I don't think we've actually had the opportunity as a party to thank Shona for her service to our nation as Deputy First Minister. And I think it would be important for us not just to mark her service to our nation, but also her selflessness in her service to our party as well. Thank you, Shona. Friends, our health service is our most treasured public institution and one of the most important policy areas for the people that we are seeking to serve. Like all public services, as Jenny set out, not just here in Scotland, but across the UK and beyond, health and social care services are under extreme pressure. Jenny spoke of the COVID impact, and that is very real still in our hospitals, with the number of people hospitalised with COVID, and the impact that it's had on our staff, as well as the cases, the issues that people are arriving at hospital with post-COVID. And we must be realistic about the fact that too many people are waiting for too long for treatment and diagnostic tests here in Scotland. That affects health outcomes, it affects our staff, and it affects our economy and society. And that's why we as a government have prioritised our investment in health and social care services over a number of years, but particularly when the public finances have been incredibly tight over the last couple of years. The budget that I am now responsible for has reached a record £19.5 billion. We passed on a real terms increase in the budget for health and social care this year, while our block grant was cut by Westminster and while the health services in England are being squeezed. And we did that because we reject austerity. We have used our powers to create a progressive taxation system. And if we had listened to the Conservatives, we would have had £1.5 billion less to spend on the investment in public services that we have carried out, like our health services. But it's not just the Tories any longer that want to cut tax for the richest in Scotland. Shamefully, Labour want to follow suit. And Conference, the Labour Party in Scotland has sold out on the very basic principle of progressive taxation, under orders from Keir Starmer. So when they are willing to abandon the very basic principles around taxation that makes their party progressive or not, how on earth can we trust them with the basic principles of our health service? And what has our record investment funded by progressive taxation delivered? Free prescriptions. NHS staffing is at a record high and has had 12 consecutive years of growth. Our core accident emergency units in Scotland are the best performing anywhere in the UK. We have the highest number of GPs per head of population than anywhere else in the UK, not just this year, but for the last 5 years. We have led the world on public health measures such as minimum unit pricing for alcohol to help prevent further ill health. And we have scrapped hospital parking charges in NHS-run hospitals. And goodness knows where my constituents in Airdrie and Shotts would have been if we had not reversed Labour's plan to shut Monkland's accident and emergency unit. So we are going to continue, colleagues, to suffer the negativity in the commentary from the opposition and the media about our health services. We must be realistic about the challenge. Of course we do. But we owe it to our incredible health service staff and our patients to celebrate the success that there is in our health service as well. And yes, we also need to embark on reform of our health and social care services. We need to see improvements in our health and social care services. And on reform, unlike Labour, I can tell you this right now, Conference. For as long as the SNP is in power in Scotland, our health service will be publicly owned and free at the point of use. But of course, reform we must to see a sustainable health and social care service going forward, to improve the services our people we serve need and deserve, and to enhance and embrace the innovation that is available to us, all of which I hope we will have the opportunity to discuss in the session before us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Neil. And moving on to you, Angela.
Thanks very much, Lorna, and I suspect Lorna's going to get her own back on behalf of you all by trying to keep me to 3 minutes. It goes without saying that the first duty of any government is to keep its citizens safe. And my overarching priority as the Cabinet Secretary for Justice and Home Affairs is to ensure that Scotland is safe, just and resilient to the challenges that we face now and in the future. And it may seem an obvious thing, but it is important to stress the central role of a well-functioning justice system, because a well-functioning justice system is the cornerstone of a well-functioning democracy, and I think we've seen some of that play out recently. It is a contributory to our missions on equality. There, of course, is no justice without social justice, and, of course, that stability and safety of our nation is a cornerstone of a strong and growing economy. And justice, as with other public services, need to be delivered in an effective and an efficient manner that first and foremost puts people at its very centre. And of course, the challenges that we often face in broader society are often played out in our justice system, you know, whether that's if you go into our courtrooms, social work department or our prisons, you will see the challenges around perhaps education, people who are care experienced, people who are in distress due to mental health. And we can, of course, rightly and proudly say that under the SNP, Scotland is safer today than it was 17 years ago. Overall, crime has reduced by 40% since 2006-07. It's reduced by over 50% since its peak in 1991. And we know that not all crimes will be reported, and that's why the Scottish Criminal Justice Survey is so important, because it shows, it demonstrates that the proportion of the population who have reported being victim or been victimised as a result of offensive behaviour, that has reduced from 20% to 10% over time. So people do feel safer. That's a huge credit to our police force and our police officers and civilian staff, as well as our other justice partners. And we've already heard that persistent theme through all the presentations today, that we have more police officers, teachers and GPs and nurses per head of the population than other parts of the UK. And again, despite the deeply challenging financial times, we are also investing records amount into policing, £1.55 billion. And Police Scotland this year will recruit more officers to their service than in their history since their inception in 2013. But the reality, the quite hard reality, is that the nature of crime is changing. We see crimes of dishonesty increase, particularly shoplifting, domestic abuse, sexual crime is at its highest level ever. We see those long-term increase in crimes, particular against women and girls. And you can have that debate about whether that's increasing frequency or increasing reporting. And of course, both factors will be true. And that's, of course, in the wider strategic threat of serious organised crime, cyber and online offences too. And that's why we need to continue to invest in change how we respond to the changing nature of crime. Yesterday, I attended a fringe meeting and we spoke about the world-leading digital evidence sharing capability, the importance of body-worn video, summary case management in our courts to get earlier resolutions, and that vital collaboration between mental health and justice, and also the pre-recording of evidence for victims. We have a number of very important reforms going through the Scottish Parliament just now, namely in the Victims' Witness and Justice Reform Bill. And that is about embedding expertise in our system, primarily via the Sexual Offences Court, and adopting that requirement on all of our justice agencies to be trauma-informed, to being able to recognise and respond to the impact of trauma. And again, I'm very pleased that despite the challenging financial times, that we continue to invest £48 million in victim support organisations, and of course other colleagues in government are also investing in the Equally Safe programme, which is combating violence against women and girls. And I'll just finally say a very brief word with respect to prisons and community sentencing. With all of our sentencing options, whether that's sentencing in the community or sentencing in prison, the purpose is to change lives, and to change lives so that we continue to create safer communities. Scotland, along with the rest of the UK, has one of the highest prison populations in Western Europe, but we are not a country that is uniquely unsafe or uniquely bad. I think that is self-evident that we continue to improve community safety. There will always be a place for prisons. You're speaking to a former prison social worker, but prisons first and foremost have to protect, they have to punish, but they also have to rehabilitate and reintegrate. So the work, that public sector reform to shift the balance and to increase the use of robust community justice disposals is particularly important. And I had the great pleasure last week to visit Greater Easterhouse Helping Hands, and to see the work that they do to change lives and create a safer community and a safer locality by the work they do to rehabilitate and support offenders to make amends to the community. So I'm quite sure that my 3 minutes is up.
I think so.
It's probably well up, and I'll draw my remarks there, and I look forward to answering any questions.
We'll indulge you slightly, Chair, but don't let it happen again. We've got some questions in for the Cab 6, and the first question is to all the panel. And Neil, I think I'm going to pick on you first. Is there more money? Is more money the only thing that we need to improve our public services?
No, but more money is definitely a factor. And I remember back to the election campaign where I took part in a Newsnight debate in Birmingham with Wes Streeting on health services. And he said that, you know, we can't just throw more money at the health service. And I said, but you also can't improve things and reform by cutting money to the health service. So money is important, but reform and improvement is important as well. We need to make sure that we are maximising productivity within the health service and that we're putting our investments into areas where we can see not just increases in productivity, but also the embracing innovation and making those investments in staff time so that we can see the reductions in the waiting lists that we need to see and which we've embarked upon this year. So, in short, no, but money is absolutely essential still to make sure that we have the improvements and reform that we need taken forward to see sustainable public services, particularly in my case for the health service.
Thanks, Neil. Shona?
So, money matters, clearly, and it is part of the investment in the fabric of society. And of course, we have, as a government, invested in those key public services over many years. But it's also about how services are delivered. So I mentioned in my remarks about the innovative work going on in Glasgow, and I could sit here all afternoon tell you about that. I'm not going to do that, but let me just mention the crux of it. So when I worked in social work in Glasgow, the interventions with families went something along the lines of, you're not, we don't like the way you're bringing up your kids that are at risk. Here's a list of things we need you to do, but we're not going to give you any support in doing them, setting families essentially up to fail, and then lo and behold, the kids were removed. Now, I don't mean that in any way as a, pejorative about social workers per se, but it was the practice. And instead, what Glasgow are now doing is they're getting alongside families and asking, what can we do to help you with the problems that you have? Because no one chooses poverty as a way of life. Families find themselves in difficult situations. They find themselves with the challenges of poverty, of addiction. And getting alongside families and asking them, what can we do to help you? And then together agreeing what course of action is going to be taken. That has resulted in a 50% reduction in kids being taken into care in Glasgow. Now, why does that matter? Well, it matters in two ways. The outcomes for the kids are better. And secondly, it saves money, and that's money that can be invested in supporting families in different ways. So that is one example. There are many, many others, but it's one example of where money is being used more effectively with better outcomes for kids, and that for me is a winner.
Thanks very much, Shona. Jenny?
Thanks, Lorna. Yeah, I think I would agree with Neil and with Shona. It's not always about more money, and sometimes it is about budgets working together, and we see that in education quite often, for example, through the Scottish Attainment Challenge, where we're putting in £1 billion of extra investment during this Parliament. We see head teachers making decisions to use health services, for example, directly in their schools to improve outcomes for young people. So sometimes it's about working differently. And another example, of course, comes from SNP around Falkirk. I think Cecil's here somewhere. They've used their Attainment Challenge funding to help support income maximisation officers, for example, in their schools, which is helping families with the cost of living crisis. So sometimes it's about using budgets from elsewhere to help meet the needs of families across the piece, not just in education. And I think we are all, I know at this current time, thinking about different ways of working as we approach the budget, because it is going to get increasingly more challenged. Although having said all that, Lorna, The decisions that are taken elsewhere, particularly in relation to Scotland's children, have an impact on their outcomes. So the two-child cap, the bedroom tax, cuts to universal credit, that all harms outcomes for our children and young people. And we should never allow the Westminster parties to attempt to gaslight us and pretend that these problems are of our making. We are using taxpayers' money in Scotland to mitigate against the harmful impacts of austerity, millions of pounds every year that we could use better improving outcomes for Scotland's children through investing in our education system.
Very well said, Jenny. And over to you, Angela.
Thanks very much, Lorna. I mean, I do always think it's important to test when people say, well, we can't do that because we need a change in the law, or we can't do that because we need more money. And I do think it's absolutely imperative that we test that at all times. There is a financial necessity to test that. And some of the biggest changes that we have achieved within justice has actually been about that whole systems approach. And I'm thinking in particular around the incarceration of young people. So, if I take a trip down memory lane when, I went to my work 20 odd years ago in Perth Prison, and I would pass the Young Offenders Institute in Polmont, there would be several hundred young people in Polmont. Several hundred. So in terms of the 18 to 20-year-olds, under 21-year-olds, those numbers usually sit around 160 to 175. And of course, before recess, we have passed legislation to end the incarceration of children, and that being under 18s. And that is a significant achievement and something that we should defend to the hilt. It also means, in terms of that whole system's more preventative approach, that we have successfully, by 90% reduced the number of children that are being prosecuted. And that is all to the good and the long-term benefits of children and their families and our communities. And I can also point to the work that Neil and I are invested in terms of that interface between justice services and mental health. I don't want police officers spending large parts of their shift in an A&E because they can't safely hand someone over. But also, Neil wants people to get the right care at the right time. And the work that we're doing, it's maybe not the best title, it's we've called it the Framework for Collaboration, but it doesn't involve a change in legislation. It's actually been about getting practitioners, identifying the areas, and actually Lanarkshire is one area that is dealing with this really well, where there's tremendous partnership work between police and local mental health services and NHS partners. That where we have those nuggets of good practice, where people are doing things well, why are we not doing it, across the board? So it's sometimes just inevitably about some of those hard conversations about changing the way we do things, because we have to challenge it's I was been. Well, it's maybe I was been, but that doesn't mean that the practice is fit for the future.
Thanks very much, Angela. So we're moving on to specific questions here, and the first one up is for you, Neil. It's how do we ensure that we're on the front foot on NHS reform, and how can we better make the link between the pressures our public services are facing and the need for independence?
So, in terms of being on the front foot on reform, I think we are. I think it's an issue that is not easy or straightforward, because sometimes it's going to mean difficult conversations around service delivery, how services and where services are being delivered, but making sure that it is being led by clinicians, by medical experts on what is the safest way of delivering services, but also how we adopt the innovation that is available to us. We had an incredible fringe session at lunchtime talking about the innovations, the research that is available to us in brain health and the work that is underway to understand, to be able to provide earlier diagnosis of brain conditions such as dementia, Alzheimer's and others. And we've got the my Chief Medical Officer also working extensively on how we can have earlier diagnosis of cardiovascular disease, because it has an element of predictability around the types of people, their lifestyle, and how likely they are to develop elements of cardiovascular disease that sadly still cost so many lives here in Scotland. So I think we are well down the road in terms of an understanding amongst the public of the need for reform, for that earlier preventative intervention at primary care levels. I had a very good conversation with the Royal Colleges last week on how they can be involved from a clinical perspective on the clinical leadership that's required in order to do that, and which measurements we're using to measure success. How we link that to independence comes back to the last question around how we finance that, because we have seen a reduction in investment in health and social care services south of the border. That means our block grant has been reduced and inhibits our ability to invest in the way we would want. We cannot use the resources that are ours in a way that we would want to. And we need to make the case and make the connection between the cost of living crisis, between the pressures that are in our public services and the decisions that are being taken at Westminster that Jenny so eloquently outlined, and narrow it down to the fact that many of the issues that we're facing, both the drivers of ill health and poverty and health inequalities, but also the strain that is on our public finances, are all down to decisions that are not of our making and we're having to mitigate. So I think we need to keep ongoing, both on setting the agenda of reform, but also linking the need for the independence very much to what we're facing right now in health and social care services.
And the next up in the hot seat is you, Angela. In terms of policing and crime, how do our police forces need to change to reflect crimes of today, e.g. an increase in cybercrime? And as a party, we should be proud of the fact that crime is now at the lowest level since 1974. How do we continue to maintain that level?
So I'll pick up the point about cyber security, because there's both a domestic and an international aspect to this, and it is something that focuses the mind right across government portfolios, because in terms of cyber attacks, that can present a great risk to our public services. It can be pursued by hostile states for nefarious purposes. So our resilience to cyber attacks is absolutely imperative, and that's a key focus of my work, not just as Cabinet Secretary for Justice, but also with my cross-government resilience hat on, because we have to be able to identify those risks, and we have to ensure that public services and indeed, particularly smaller companies, small to medium-sized enterprises and the charity sector, that they are prepared and that they are thinking very closely about the need to be cyber resilient, because a disturbance can indeed turn vital services upside down. There are also other risks to individuals, quite often vulnerable individuals, as a result of scams. And we do know, and the question is quite apt, because although overall crime is down, as I said in my opening remarks, it is changing, and cyber-related crime has increased, particularly driven by scams. So there is more to be done in terms of public awareness and what individuals can do to keep themselves protected. But it also points to the need to change the skills in the workforce across the criminal justice system, but I suppose in particular the police, because it does mean that you need people who are particularly IT savvy and skilled. There's a real expertise around cyber security, and indeed a lot of our educational establishments, higher education and colleges, are now doing courses on ethical hacking and how to upskill the workforce in terms of promoting that cyber security. And that means means that that has to be embedded within our criminal justice system and indeed in our police force, whether that's amongst police officers or indeed civilian staff.
Thanks very much, Angela. And the last question is, just before I pass back to Shona to sum up, is for Jenny. How will the process of education reform help to drive improvements in our schools?
Thanks, Lorna. So I think there are two parts to education reform. The first relates to qualifications reform. And I think it's worthwhile, first of all, saying that we have seen real transformation in relation to the type of qualifications we have in Scotland under the SNP. So we now have more young people going on to a range of different pathways, and in the most recent exam results, we saw record numbers of young people undertaking vocational pathways, and I think that's certainly to be welcomed. Certainly when I was at school, and Neil probably 20 odd years ago, it was if you weren't staying on to sit 5 higher, you were out, and you were told at the end of S4 to leave. That's not the case anymore, because we have a much more supportive education system with a range of different pathways open to our young people. And that's a strength, I think, of our education system. In terms of the bodies themselves, though, the SQA needs to reform to become Qualifications Scotland, and it's got to become a body that listens to Scotland's teachers. That was a real challenge. I think we all saw that during the pandemic, but it has to be much more responsive to Scotland's teachers. We also need to have Education Scotland reformed to provide support to curriculum. And actually, that's what it formally did. So I think those two bodies will help to better support Scotland's teachers. But the third body I want to touch on is the Centre for Teaching Excellence, which will be a new body for Scotland's teachers, and it will allow them to come out of Scotland's classrooms on secondment, to have the opportunity to engage with academic research and then to go back out into the classroom. We need to raise the game for Scotland's teachers and give them that professional opportunity. So I'm very much committed to working with them to that end, and also to reforming our qualification system to make sure it's fit for purpose post-pandemic. One of the things that we've heard from the OECD and a number of other countries post-pandemic is this move towards high-stake final exams that we like in Scotland creates a lot of pressure on our young people. So we need to think again about the range of different assessments that we use in our schools to help support them and to prepare them for a world after they leave school. That's why those pathways I spoke about are so important. So a reformed qualifications body, but also a reformed Education Scotland and a new Centre for Teaching Excellence that will support Scotland's teachers in supporting Scotland's young people.
Shona.
I'll be very brief. Thank you for all the questions and for what has been hopefully a session that's given you a bit of insight into the innovation and excellence that we have within our public services in Scotland. And as I said in my speech, I guess the message I want to leave with you is if we don't tell the story, no one else is going to. So everyone here and everyone, all of our membership and our supporters, we need to get the message out there about the excellence we do have in our public services, the innovation, the things that people, we do here in Scotland that's not done anywhere else. And at the same time, be really clear of the threat that is posed because of Westminster Austerity to all of that progress. And of course, what more we could do if we had the full fiscal levers of independence. It's a clear message, folks. And I think over the next 2 years and to 2026, that's what we all need to be getting out on the doors and getting that message across. Thanks.
Thanks very much to the panel. We'll be moving on to topical resolutions, and I'll be handing the chair back to the business convener in just a second. So if you are going to leave, if I could ask if you do so quietly and quickly at the moment, and we'll get the topical resolutions up on the screen.
We'll just give people a wee minute to leave if they're departing. Okay, colleagues, thank you for staying around for these very important topical resolutions. The next resolution before you, you can see on the screen behind me, is lasting peace in Ukraine. And I would like to invite Jack O'Neill to come and propose the resolution. And Jack is a member of the YSI. Big welcome to Jack.
Thank you very much, Conference. It's nerve-wracking getting up here to speak, but it's nothing compared to what men my age are doing in Ukraine, fighting for their democracy. It's a privilege. It's a privilege to be able to speak on this today, and it's an even bigger privilege to be a member of a political party who puts the principles of freedom, democracy and self-determination at its core. And we are very lucky. To defend those principles, all we need to do is stand for election. Now, we might not always like the results of an election, but, you know, them's the breaks, that's democracy. And regardless of any election result, democracy is always worth defending, fighting and dying for. Ukrainians know that all too well. They are defending, they are fighting, and tens of thousands of them have died to defend not just their principles, but ours too. And it's not just their democracy that they're defending, it's yours. Because make no mistake, it is Ukraine now, but if Putin wins, it will be the Baltics tomorrow, and it will be NATO allies that are at risk. And I'd like to pay a very special tribute, actually, to the Scottish volunteers who have gone to Ukraine to fight for the Ukrainian armed forces against the Russians. They deserve very special recognition from us. They're the very best of us, and I hope that you'll join me in thanking them for all of their efforts. Right now, as I speak in this stage, somewhere in eastern Ukraine, or in Kursk, there is a group of men my age and younger in a trench. They are waiting to be hit by artillery. They might be being hit by artillery now. They eagerly, well, not eagerly, they diligently hold their position and very anxiously watch for the latest assault that could be from tanks, jets, mortar squads, or yet another meat grinder offensive. And every day they confront the very worst aspects of humanity to defend the very best. We made the very sensible decision 12 years ago at a conference to support NATO membership. All we had to do was vote. The only cost to us was a couple of MSPs. We support the restoration of EU membership. Businesses suffer, but the only political consequence for us is the occasional rebuke from Westminster. But the cost to Ukraine of those exact same desires to join NATO and the EU is bombs raining down on their civilians, forcing doctors, lawyers, teachers into packing up their day jobs to man the front line. They are tired of the killing, they are tired of killing, but every day they do what they must to protect their people and our principles, and for their desires for their nation to be better. And what are we doing? Well, the Scottish Government has done its humanitarian duty in welcoming and supporting refugees. It's not enough. Providing a safe haven for people fleeing war does not restore their homes. It doesn't restore their schools or hospitals, and it doesn't end the fighting. And so I hope that the Scottish Government will continue to support the efforts of Ukraine to protect their people and principles and dedicate what it can to help bring about peace. And I hope that this party will call out Russia for what it is, a terrorist state. The UK Government, who in fairness led the way in terms of military support for Ukraine, now panders to Russian disinformation and Putin's empty threats. Too slow on seizing Russian money in the UK, too slow in delivering military aid, and now disgracefully limiting the Ukrainians' military capabilities by preventing them from using Storm Shadow missiles on Russian soil. I hope our MPs will call Starmer out for what that is, cowardice. Because the empowerment of the Ukrainian military is vital. We know that Putin only responds to strength. Now, if Ukraine wanted to, they could end the war now and bring about peace. But a peace that allows Putin to seize Ukrainian land, that empowers and emboldens him to take further his desires for territorial expansion at the cost of neighbouring democracies, is no peace at all. If you want proof of that, take a look at the cities Russia brought peace to. Bucha and Irpin, where civilians were tied up, raped and shot by the invaders. Bakhmut, once a city of tens of thousands, now nothing more than rubble. That's Russian peace for you. And that's why we have to be very careful when we talk about peace. Far too often, the seemingly innocent suggestions of peace from far-left politicians like Jeremy Corbyn ignore the reality of what peace actually means. Peace doesn't just mean an end to fighting. It means Ukraine's territorial integrity is wholly restored and their cities rebuilt. It means an end to Putin's regime, and it means we help deliver a powerful display to the rest of the world that imperialist antics won't be tolerated and that democracy will always triumph over tyranny. The only peace worth pursuing is the one Ukraine themselves propose, and I'm glad that Zelensky will present his plan to Biden, Harris and Trump soon. Friends, I have spoken about my demands of MPs and MSPs in Western nations, but I actually have a call for everyone. Don't allow yourself to forget about Ukraine. Don't allow yourself to be ignorant of the suffering of their people. Never forget your obligations to defend your principles as much abroad as you do at home. And never pander or be taken in by Russian disinformation. Please, I implore you to support this resolution and to continue to support Ukraine. Thank you.
Thanks, Jack. And can I invite Councillor Lloyd Melville to come to the podium to second the resolution, please? Welcome, Lloyd. You've got 3 minutes.
Thank you. Fellow delegates, friends, much like the humanitarian catastrophe unfolding in Gaza, the war currently happening in Ukraine is one of the great moral issues of our time. Like Jack, I am immensely proud to be a member of a party which has always said, loud and clear, we will always stand with those fighting for freedom from tyranny. This party has been at the forefront of supporting Ukraine. Our MPs have called for faster deliveries of arms to enable Ukraine to defend itself. We have condemned the vile war crimes perpetrated by Vladimir Putin and his allies, and Scotland has opened our doors to provide a safe, temporary home for thousands of people fleeing from the unfolding disaster. And I want to focus on that latter point for a moment and give everyone at conference an example of the impact that that approach has had. Living in my ward of Monifieth in Sidlaw is a young man called Matvey. He and his family fled the war in Ukraine and settled here in Scotland. Through his extraordinary fortitude and with the support of an exceptional team of teachers, friends and his family, Matvey has not only learned English, not only has he sat exams and secured straight A results, he was recently awarded the Ducks of Monifieth High School. That is Scotland's welcoming spirit in action. Every one of us should be immensely proud of our party's leadership in that respect. But as Jack has said, that is not enough. All of us have seen the pictures of bombed and burnt-out homes, nurseries, schools, hospitals. None of us can afford to become immune to these images, and none of us can shrink from what is needed to bring this calamity to an end. We must continue to press for the material support that Ukraine needs to beat back Putin's illegal invasion. As a harsh winter approaches, the Russians are escalating their attacks on Ukrainian civilian energy infrastructure. They are attempting to freeze innocent civilians in their homes. Another war crime perpetuated by the Russians, which the EU Energy Commissioner has described as unprecedented in modern conflicts. Friends, Ukraine does not only fight for themselves, they fight for all of us, for the very principles of democracy and self-governance, values which we all hold dear to our hearts. So let us back their plan for peace and fight for a day where no child goes to sleep for fear of being bombed. Thank you.
Conference, can I propose that we accept this resolution by acclaim? Thank you very much for your cooperation. We have one more topical resolution to address today. And just as I'm going to say to those that are leaving, do not leave any rubbish behind. That's just a wee appeal. I probably should have said that about 2 hours ago. But just a wee help would be appreciated. Can I now invite my friend and colleague Claire Adamson, MSP, to come to the podium to propose the resolution which is in relation to the Scotland Office.
Thank you very much, Business Convener. Good afternoon, colleagues. Well, there's been much discussion at the conference about the election, and we know and have come to the conclusion that people voted for change. They did not get change, they got a changeling. It looks like Labour, it occasionally talks like Labour, but beneath lurks an entity rammed full of Tory fiscal policy, austerity and unionist ideology. As convener of the Constitution Europe External Affairs and Culture Committee, I spend time working with colleagues from across the parliaments of the United Kingdom, and we have all unanimously come out against the divisiveness of levelling up funds that actually ride a coach and horses through the devolution settlements of Stormont, of the Senate and of Holyrood. And Brexit has changed everything. The Tories' Internal Market Act has placed our very devolution at risk, and this is evidenced by the number of times they ignored the Sewell Convention, by the use of Section 35 orders, and by stopping in its track our deposit return scheme in Scotland, but also telling Wales, no, you can't have glass in your deposit scheme either, just limiting everything that devolution should have given us the powers to deliver. So one of the first acts of Keir Starmer is to award what is reported to be £150 million to Ian Murray in the Scottish Office to tackle child poverty in Scotland. The best thing Labour could do to tackle child poverty in Scotland is scrap the two-child cap and its abhorrent rape clause. In my own constituency in Motherwell, Musha, North Lanarkshire is run by a Labour and Tory arrangement that makes sure that their Labour policies can get through. And they, at the moment, have just scrapped the bus, increased the limit for the buses to 3 miles, and increased the school meals to one of the highest levels in the whole of Scotland. And this is affecting families in my constituency in the middle of a cost of living crisis. We've heard that figure, £150 million, a lot at this conference. That is what's estimated that's going to be cut, that will enforce this government having to bring in what we don't want to do in the means testing of the winter fuel payment for our pensioners. This is simply not good enough. But, Conference, I didn't join the SNP to argue for the devolution and the protection of devolution. What we're doing today is calling out what we see as the divisive nature of Westminster and its control of the finances of Scotland. I joined in the 1990s. I remember wearing a T-shirt at a Glasgow rally with an oil rig on it saying, Scotland has all of the fuel and none of the power. 30 years later, we'd probably have a wind turbine saying, all of the wind, none of the windfall. Enough is enough. We know change will only come with independence, but please support our motion calling out the Westminster Government today. Thank you.
And can I invite Emma Roddick to the stage to second the motion? And warm welcome to Emma. Emma will be our final speaker today.
Thank you very much, Convener and Conference. I'm very pleased to second this important resolution. I've sat in the Chamber, in committees, in meetings with Labour MSPs where both of us have been arguing for the same things from the Tories: more support for housing, for disabled people and for those who need it most. So knowing them as I do, I don't want to believe that all Labour representatives in Scotland knew that they were lying when they told people that they were going to bring change, but they were. And I don't want to believe that they all knew that they were going to implement further austerity, but that is what they've done. And more importantly, I don't believe that all of those who chose to vote Labour this time around did so to endorse taking money out of pensioners' pockets, increasing energy bills or circumventing devolution, but that is what Labour has chosen to do in their name. Now, I've been thinking a lot recently about comments that were made back in 2015 when the SNP stormed the general election. We had journalists in Westminster reporting on grumbles from the old guard. There seemed to be more Scots this time around. So that just tells me that we didn't just lose out on more SNP MPs. We lost out on more MPs who will stand up for Scotland, because it is clear that no matter how much it conflicts with anything that they've said in the past, Scottish Labour will not stand against their own UK leaders as they continue to drag us down the same Conservative path of the last 15 years, even when it comes to defending something like the Tory two-child cap, which is now the Labour two-child cap. £150 million given to the Scotland office, while 160 million is taken straight from the budget to warm Scottish pensioners, with the Scottish Government learning about this through the press. We could do so much more with that money, and we would be spending it on the real priorities of Scotland. Now, we've got trust to rebuild and principles to prove to the public, but in the meantime, we cannot allow Labour to take power from a Scottish Parliament that will still stand up for Scotland. Labour is breaking the trust with those voters who believed it when they said they wanted to improve the relationship with the Scottish Parliament and end austerity. And we have to make that clear to everyone out there and rebuild that trust in the party that will always protect those who need it most. Otherwise, free prescriptions, childcare, bus travel, financial support to new families, all of it is at risk in 2026. So Labour has a choice to make. Either deliver that change and end austerity and work with the Scottish Government, or prove our point that regardless of who is in power in the UK Government, independence is the only way to deliver real change.
Thank you, Emma. Conference, can I put it to you that we accept this resolution by acclaim, please? Thank you all very much. That brings today's business to an end. I will see you all bright and early, bright and breezy tomorrow morning. Hopefully people will be in their seats by the back of 10. First piece of business is the fraternal address by our colleagues from Plaid Cymru. So look forward to seeing you all tomorrow. Have a lovely evening.
So that's the conclusion to the second day SNP Conference in Edinburgh. We're live in Edinburgh, and I suppose most people would have been looking forward most today to the speech by Stephen Flynn. He started by congratulating his dad, who had just been newly elected as the leader of the SNP Council in Dundee. He straight away talked then about the poor results that the SNP was meted out in the general election, and the dozens of MPs that the SNP lost in Westminster, said that cannot be ignored. He also said that if you're part of a team, then you can't point fingers. He said the losses in Westminster were not a reflection of the quality of the work done by SNP MPs who have now gone, and he had a long list of the work that SNP MPs had done on issues such as Brexit and Gaza, WASPy women, and the proroguing of Parliament, the Partygate, etc. His best bit, I thought, was when he said that, one of the best bits was that he said that for every election loss is a silver lining, which is basically a reference to Douglas Ross, who is no longer an MP or leader of the Scottish Tory party. He talked about then went on to New Labour and the government's campaign, the choices that the new government has made since the general election, promises broken, and ushering in a new era of austerity. And then he went on to Labour in Scotland and pointed out that Mr Sarwar is now hard to find, and he's not the hard man of Scottish politics that he claimed to be before the general election, ready to stand up against Starmer for Scotland. Now he's in hiding and wondering how he's going to deal with whatever's now coming from changes or lies coming from his bosses in London. And then he moved on to independence finally and said that that the SNP had to listen and engage with those who are unionists who do not share our vision, as it is their Scotland also, and ultimately the decisions made in Scotland are for Scotland. I'm wondering if it's maybe possible to go to our colleagues in Edinburgh so we can maybe discuss the speech. Another bit that I particularly enjoyed from Mr Flynn's speech was when he said, I thought it was good because not only was it funny, but also because it was true. And he labelled Westminster, he said, the Westminster roundabout has turned full circle. George Osborne and Rachel Reeves, the architect and the apprentice of austerity. So he read a quote out, I believe, which he said, sounds like Rachel Reeves, but it was actually George Osborne, or Gideon Osborne, as his real name is, from 14 years ago. Following Mr Flynn's speech...
Have you got a live stream going elsewhere just now?
Sorry?
Is there a live stream on the go somewhere else?
No, the live stream has ended. So
Colette,
this has been live streamed by us.
Resolutions about the end of Westminster austerity. That was put forward by Colette Stevenson, MSP, and Bob Doris, MP. Bob's the new SNP MP, who I think, if I'm right, unseated Douglas Ross in his constituency, and he talked about watching Labour MPs from Scotland literally cheering in the chamber at Westminster as Rachel Reeves announced cuts and more austerity. And he couldn't believe that he was witnessing that, and that resolution was accepted by acclaim. The next resolution was a review of emergency services in islands and rural areas, and that was put forward by Chris from the Islay, Jura and Colonsay branch in Inverness. He said that the current centralised system is too remote and a flexible local response no longer exists. And I think I'm joined now by my colleague live in Edinburgh. Douglas, are you there? Can you hear me?
Yes, good afternoon, Brian.
Hello.
I am indeed here, and joining me to discuss the conference is Jim Fairley, MSP. Welcome, Jim.
Hi, Alex. How you doing?
Good, and seems that people were fairly happy and positive in the messages I was hearing today.
Yeah, I've been very pleasantly surprised. We have been told that this is going to be a difficult conference for us. It's we're on the back of a really difficult election result. There's no hiding from that. I don't think anybody has hidden from it. I think the First Minister yesterday absolutely did the right thing. He allowed the membership to come in, ask their questions, vent their frustrations, have that conversation, and it's done. Now we move on, and as we move on, we start thinking, what does 2026 look like now? So yeah, I'm pleasantly surprised and delighted just at how much positivity there is in amongst the membership. It's been a good couple of days.
Good. Nothing today specifically in your area of agriculture, but what caught your attention most?
Well, I've got agriculture and connectivity because I have a junior responsibility in the transport sector as well. So I did a fringe meeting about that this morning, and we were talking about buses. Mm-hmm. Buses, they're a huge thing. I've been really surprised at how interesting buses are. It doesn't sound like that, but they genuinely are. And we have got this climate issue that we're all trying to tackle. We're going to try to get more people out of their cars into public transport. and buses are the key. About 74% of all public transport is on bus. So, you know, you kind of take it for granted, but they're a huge part of what we can do to help us tackle our climate emissions. So I did quite a bit of work on that this morning. I've been speaking to quite a few people around that. I went in earlier on, I heard Stephen's speech. It was very, very good. He's hitting the right tone. And yeah, no, it's just been a really good, positive couple of days.
Good. Sticking with the buses, of course, I'm a very committed bus traveller. So in your area, I'm frequently at Broxton, and amazed at how that has grown in the years that there's a bus leaving there every few minutes. And most of the time I spend in Aberdeen, where of course we have hydrogen buses. So Scotland is leading in that area.
Well, we've just committed, I think it's another £41 million we put into the ScotZeb system, and that's about electrification. Perth was actually, I think, the first city that had a complete electric fleet of buses driving through the city. So if people are using the bus in Perth, they're not only not using car miles, they're actually using electric buses in the city. And if we can expand that as much as we can across the country. Now, clearly, the financial constraints that we have are huge. We know why, we know the reasons behind that. I don't need to rehearse that again. We would like to do more, of course we would, but the financial constraints are what they are. But if you're using bus, and you've got the hydrogen buses in Aberdeen, we've got the electric buses down in Perth, we're expanding that to other parts of the country. The bus companies themselves, First Bus, I was speaking to them today, they're putting investment into these electric buses. So, you know, this is all good stuff, it's good positive stuff. But transport's one of these things that never really gets talked about. The only thing that gets talked about is if things aren't happening.
Indeed, yes.
It's one of these things that's just there every day. It's a bit of stuff that happens in Scotland on a daily basis. We put a huge amount of support and money into it, but we never think about it until it's not happening.
Which brought another idea to my mind about transport that people are always complaining about, and that's the dualling of the A9. Yep. Is that under threat with financial constraints?
No, I think Fiona Haslop has already made it quite clear they're at the next stage of excuse me, of that process. We've given that commitment, and I think that is going to continue.
Good. Going back to Stephen Flynn's speech, he was very moderate in what he was saying at the end. He said too often we've talked about the last few hard yards to independence, but there are still a lot of people to convince, and something needs to be put in front of them. And I was struck by the phrase which came in many of the debates today: just imagine we had the power for independence. I was struck by another phrase of Stephen's, and that was, it's Scotland's energy. That sounded very familiar to me back in 1979. Is that going to be a slogan for the next election?
Well, that's not my role that I play, but I very clearly remember the SNP signs with it, Scotland's oil. We've been here before. We know what happens. If we don't take control of it, they will, and when they do, we lose the benefits. So, you know, the prospectus for independence, we have a Labour Party. The only thing that has changed, they came in on a message of change. The only thing that have changed is the colour of the rosette. That's it. The things that the Labour Party are doing, you could have easily mistaken them for a Tory party doing exactly the same thing. So, you know, we just have to keep talking about what does Scotland look like when we're in control of all of our resources. What are the opportunities? What are the advantages that we would have as an independent nation? And he's absolutely right. Let's keep talking up that positive message about what independence means for us, for our environment, for our children, for our grandchildren. We have just got so much going for us, and yet we have, and he was absolutely right, and another thing that he said was, we've done too much of that, oh, but they're bad down there. Well, we need to stop doing that. We need to start just talking about Scotland being the vibrant, industrious, entrepreneurial, ambitious country that I know that we are, and we need to sell that and make sure that that's the feeling that people have when we talk about Scotland. In fact, I was speaking to Richard Lockhead. Richard Lockhead does a lot of travelling around the world in his role, and he says he was in Spain, and Spanish diplomats, Spanish business people coming up and talking about Scotland. And they just wax lyrical about how brilliant Scotland is, the things that we're doing. And he said, if I could bottle that and take it home and say to people, this is what other people think about us, why do we not think this ourselves? So I think that's a big part of what we have to do. We've got to remind people what a fantastic country Scotland is and how we can make the most of that.
Indeed, and something that we speak about very frequently on Broadcasting Scotland is the power of the media and how hard it is to get a message through. And I was struck this week, and Shona Robison mentioned it, with the Chancellor saying Scotland is spending more than it earns. Now, everyone slightly involved in Scottish politics knows that that's not possible, but it was the headline in the newspapers. Are we not getting the message through to the general public?
If we're going to rely on the media to get that message through to the general public, then we're going to fail. So that's why these campaigns that the SNP are brilliant at, people on the ground, on the streets, chapping on doors, that's how we get our message out, through social media, through the campaigning that we do. It's only the party that's going to do it. Nobody else is going to do it for us, because they do not want us to succeed. There is no way that we're going to get the kind of fair coverage that we would need in order to tell these stories. So we just have to do it ourselves, and the best way to do that is, so we've got 2 by-elections coming up in my constituency, one in Perth City North and one in Strathallan. And that gives us another opportunity, despite the fact that the activists that we've got, they're tired. You know, we've just come through a big election campaign. Slightly better for us because Pete Wishart won. We won that seat, and so there's a bit of better momentum for us. But that gives us another opportunity to go out and talk about the positives, talk about the things that we are doing as a party, and talk about what more we could be by being an independent country. And we have to do it every single time there's an opportunity.
Yeah, somebody said to me this morning, the 2026 election starts here. I would think that possibly it's actually already started before this, but...
Yeah. I can assure you it certainly started for me long before now. No, when I was knocking doors for Pete Wishart, I was knocking doors for my campaign as well.
Indeed, yeah.
That's, you know, and the other thing that we do in Perthing and Ross, and it's deep rooted, the SNP are deep rooted, but every single campaign is a campaign that we're fighting because we might lose it. You know, there's no complacency. You fight every single campaign as though it's a marginal, as though there's a real chance that somebody else could take your seat. So therefore, there is nothing held back. You've got to absolutely get out there and do the job.
Okay, well, I wish you every success in the campaign, and we'll return to the studio in Glasgow.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Jim.
Actually, I was wondering if was there any chance that we could stick with... I'd like to have a chat with Douglas, if that's possible. I don't think viewers really want to listen to me droning on about my rehashes of what somebody's already said. But it doesn't look like I'm going to be given that option. I'm just interested in the resolutions. I think the resolutions are often overlooked. Oh, hello. Jim, can I maybe ask you a question? Can you hear me?
It'll have to come through me because Jim doesn't have an earpiece.
Oh right, okay. Well, I'm just thinking that I take it Jim was at the closed session that the First Minister gave yesterday to delegates right at the start of conference, which struck me as being quite unusual and not really the norm. Can he give us any sense of what the atmosphere was like? Was it tense? Were delegates angry, or were their minds put at ease by the end of the session? Is there anything he can give us at all about what went on behind those closed doors?
Well, he did say it was positive, but I will ask again. Of course, everyone is so curious as to what went on in the closed doors session yesterday, and I know you'll be sworn to secrecy, but just a little bit of the mood music of it would be interesting.
It's not even a case of sworn to secrecy. The party had an opportunity to say, okay, that was bad. We lost far too many colleagues. How did it happen, and how are we going to make sure that it doesn't happen again? How do we get back in the front foot? So the specifics I'm not going to go into. Those were the conversations that we were having in the room with each other. But it's done. We've done the bloodletting. It's finished, and now all our focus is going to be on how do we make sure we win the by-elections that are coming up. So if you are listening to this and there is by-elections in your constituency, please get out, see every single one of them as something that we want to win to build that momentum, get right in behind your candidates in your local areas, because every single time we win a by-election, it makes it that little bit easier when we come to 2026, because we simply cannot afford to take our foot off the gas. 2026 is a vital, vital election for us, and we've got to win it.
Good. I hope that answers your question, Brian.
It does, but would Jim have time to maybe just answer one more question? I realise this is a bit stilted, having to go through a go-between. But I'm thinking about the resolutions. I think they're often overlooked or overshadowed by key speeches by figures like Stephen Flynn. And I'm thinking about the review of emergency services in islands and rural areas, and the fact that that was accepted by acclaim, that the current centralised system's too remote. So is this, resolutions like this, is this like a U-turn on SNP policies? Did previous conferences vote for centralised emergency services, or is it an example of delegates finally being given a say on something that was imposed by SNP government in Holyrood?
Okay, that's interesting. He's asking about the motion which was brought by the Isla branch about the decentralisation of services, of emergency services, because of the problems they had calling a national number in Isla, and there being no idea where the patient was and what the facilities were locally. And Brian is asking, is that a U-turn on SNP policy, or is it a case of members being listened to more?
To be perfectly honest, I can't answer that question because I don't know. I was in meetings for most of the day, so I've missed the resolution, so I don't know what happened with that. I know that Neil Gray was over on Isla. He met with Jenny Minto and locals, so whatever those discussions are, I genuinely don't know the details. I've spent an awful lot of time in an awful lot of meetings in this.
I can imagine. Yeah, well, essentially the motion to decentralise or to take cognizance of what was happening in places like Isla was accepted by acclaim. There were no voices against it. And we had a retired GP from Isla speaking about specific cases of a lady who had fallen and had been left lying on the floor because the ambulance wasn't available, and they hadn't considered it an emergency. But,
right. Okay.
I mean that will affect your constituency as well in some rural areas.
Yeah. And anybody that's got a rural part of their constituency, these are genuine concerns. So, well, I'm glad the party I'm glad that they're being listened to. Let's put it that way.
Good. Thank you. Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
And
please,
Brian.
Please thank Mr. Fairley for his time and patience with us, and to you too, Douglas.
I will indeed do thank Jim Fairley for his time and patience. Thank you very much indeed, Jim.
Not at all. Thanks for having me.
So I'll let my colleagues try to get more interviews put together. The next resolution that was discussed was about tackling drugs deaths crisis. So Neil Gray, the Cabinet Secretary, talked about every life lost to drug dependency was a tragedy and apologised to anyone affected. Forgive me, I'm still hearing my colleagues in my ear. I'm not quite sure why that is. Okay, thank you. Neil Gray, Cabinet Secretary, talked about the tackling the drugs death crisis and said that every life lost to drug dependency is a tragedy, and apologised to anyone affected or to anyone who had lost a loved one. He said that more must be done and used the word hope. He said that he admitted that drug deaths were unacceptably high, and said that the SNP government could blame the impact of poverty and deindustrialisation and blame them, but really he said that he didn't really want to do that, and instead said that they want to take a public health approach and avoid criminalisation of people who are involved in drugs. He said that Scotland was the first country in the world to implement a national naloxone policy, which, if I did know that, I had forgotten that. And he mentioned the first safe consumption room, which is going to be in Glasgow later this year. he admitted that the death rate, the fact that it exists, shows that the SNP government needs to do more. But he also said that the UK government had to step up and demanded more drug testing facilities across Scotland to make sure that people that are using drugs, that those drugs are safe and haven't been adulterated in any way. And he said, give us the powers we need to save lives. And he talked about the reduction of stigma. So we're coming to an end of our coverage of the second day of the SNP Conference in Edinburgh. Tomorrow is the final day of conference. There's going to be a fraternal address from Plaid Cymru in Wales. And there's going to be a policy discussion on international affairs led by Angus Robertson, the Cabinet Secretary for the Constitution and External Affairs. There's going to be 2 resolutions, one on housing as a common good, and the second one is to be on enshrining the right to abortion in a future constitution of an independent Scotland. Oh, and a third resolution, is going to be about informed consent models for adult transition care. And of course, there's going to be the First Minister, John Swinney's closing speech. Please do join us again tomorrow for our live coverage of the SNP Conference in Edinburgh. But in the meantime, I'll let you get on with the rest of the weekend. Thank you and good evening.